Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity settles in beside you and the world becomes just a little quieter for a while. Tonight we're easing into a question that people often ask in passing, as if it were something simple, something with a tidy answer printed on the back of a textbook. But as with most things about our species, the closer you look, the more the question stretches, twists and opens into a landscape of ideas. We're talking about why humans seem to have stopped evolving, why it feels like the long winding story of our species reached some kind of pause, even though the world around us hasn't taken a single break. The idea sits at the edge of our thoughts, the same way a half-remembered conversation hangs in the air long after you've walked away from it. And maybe you've wondered it yourself during a quiet moment, when you catch a reflection and think about the countless generations before you who never knew what life would look like now, yet helped shape you all the same through decisions they never realised mattered. It's a topic that reaches backward into deep time and forward into whatever comes next, and we're going to walk through it gently, without rushing, without trying to force a conclusion before we're ready. Before we go any further, I'm curious where you're listening from tonight. Are you at home settling down after a long day, or maybe taking a slow moment between tasks? And what time is it in your corner of the world right now? It always amazes me how many different places these words travel to, each one of us drifting through our own routine, winding down in our own way, yet meeting here in the same shared moment. If this kind of slow exploration feels soothing or interesting or just a welcome way to unwind, I'd be grateful if you liked the video or subscribed. It helps this little pocket of calm reach others who might be looking for the same quiet space. Now take a breath and let everything settle for a moment. We're about to look closely at an idea that's shaped endless books, debates, documentaries, and late-night discussions. The belief that humans reach some kind of endpoint in our evolutionary path is a common one. People sometimes say it casually, as if we crossed a finish line without noticing. They imagine that somewhere between developing language, inventing agriculture, and figuring out how to microwave leftovers, we stepped outside the influence of natural selection, lifted ourselves away from the pressures that shaped every other species, and became something different, something finished. But the more we examine that assumption, the more complicated it becomes. Evolution isn't a project with a blueprint waiting to be completed. It doesn't pause because a species invents antibiotics or learns how to keep warm in winter without growing extra fur. It doesn't check its watch and announce that a species is stable and therefore ready to graduate from nature's ongoing process. Evolution isn't looking forward or backward. It doesn't aim, it just responds. And yet the feeling that we've somehow stepped out of the stream persists. Maybe because life today feels less dangerous than it once was. Maybe because we built tools and medicine that protect us from problems that would have shaped our ancestors so sharply. Maybe because our lives look less like a struggle for survival and more like a long list of responsibilities, goals, and quiet moments that seem entirely removed from the pressures that forced previous generations to adapt. From the outside, it appears as though nature's influence has softened around us, but that appearance can be misleading. And understanding why asks us to take a long, slow walk through what evolution actually is, what drives it, and what we might be missing when we assume that it has stopped. The idea that humans aren't evolving anymore often comes from comparing our present to the past in a very narrow way. When we think about early humans, we picture a world full of sharp edges, unfamiliar dangers, and unpredictable environments. We imagine that every small advantage meant the difference between living long enough to raise children or slipping out of the story before leaving any trace. But the pressures of the past weren't limited to dramatic moments of survival. Most of the forces that shaped our species were subtle, gradual, and woven into the ordinary challenges of daily life. Those forces didn't disappear when we built houses or developed medications. They changed shape. Sometimes they softened, sometimes they intensified, and sometimes they shifted so slightly that we barely noticed the difference. But they didn't vanish. Evolution continues whenever traits affect the likelihood of surviving or reproducing. That doesn't require dramatic danger or fierce competition. It doesn't require predators lurking behind bushes or a shortage of shelter during winter storms. It can happen quietly through health, behavior, culture, environment, and even the structure of society. We often imagine evolution as something that pushes us forward, but really it just nudges populations based on which traits lead to more descendants over time, and those nudges can be incredibly small. A slight advantage here, a subtle disadvantage there, repeated over generations until the story becomes visible. Even now, in the comfort of modern life, differences in health, fertility, and longevity continue to influence which genes are passed on. Diets vary widely across the world, and our bodies respond differently to them. Some individuals have genetic traits that allow them to metabolize certain foods more efficiently. Others have variations in immune responses, not because of dramatic ancient battles with diseases, but because microbes, environments, and lifestyles differ across regions. People live longer in some places than others due to a combination of genetics, culture, health systems, and choices. People have children earlier or later depending on social structures, opportunities, and personal preferences, each subtly shifting the probability of which traits continue forward. These aren't dramatic survival struggles, but they are evolutionary pressures. Then there's the influence of technology. At first it might seem like technology shields us from evolution, but in some cases it creates new pressures entirely. The ability to digest certain foods, tolerate pollutants, or adapt to environments shaped by human structures may influence traits that weren't relevant thousands of years ago. Our exposure to artificial light affects sleep patterns, which influence metabolism and long-term health, and those effects can indirectly shift which traits persist. Social networks and mobility mean that people meet partners from entirely different backgrounds more often, blending genetic lineages in ways that change the trajectory of populations. All of this is evolution in motion, even if it doesn't resemble the ancient pressures that shaped our earliest ancestors. Another reason this topic feels so tangled is that many people imagine evolution as something that has a goal. They picture it as a process that improves or perfects species over time, as if there were a destination humans were working toward. Once a species becomes clever enough, strong enough, or technologically advanced enough, surely the work is done. But evolution doesn't strive for perfection. It only reflects whatever helps a population persist in its current environment. And our environment is constantly changing, both because of natural shifts and because we ourselves transform it through our choices. Whether through climate change, agriculture, urban design, or cultural habits, we continually create new conditions that future generations will need to adapt to. Those adaptations may be biological, cultural, or both, but they will continue to shape us. Some people argue that because everyone survives at higher rates today thanks to medical advancements, natural selection has weakened. But even if specific pressures have become less severe, others have emerged to take their place. Diseases that were once deadly are now treatable, but chronic illnesses influence long-term health. Fertility patterns vary widely across populations. Environmental pollutants and global travel introduced new challenges. The pressures didn't disappear, they shifted direction. And in many ways, modern life introduces such a wide range of conditions that different populations experience different pressures at the same time. That means evolution isn't slowing, it's branching. One of the most overlooked aspects of human evolution is that cultural change influences biological change. Culture affects who meets whom, who has children, how many children they have, what they eat, how they live, how they age, and what diseases they encounter. All of these shape evolution. Culture moves fast, biology moves slowly. But they are deeply intertwined. Sometimes it's the cultural change that drives the biological one. For instance, the spread of dairy farming shaped populations that developed lactase persistence. The ability to digest milk in adulthood. That wasn't nature acting in isolation. It was nature responding to human behavior, and similar interactions are happening today, even if they aren't as obvious. It's easy to look at humanity as something finished, something resting, something that has stepped out of nature's ongoing movement and landed in a place where change no longer matters in the same way it once did. The pace of our daily lives, the stability of our surroundings, and the comfort of technology create a sense of stillness that settles around us so naturally that we rarely question it. When we think about evolution, we tend to picture a dramatic march through time, from early ancestors to modern humans, a sequence of clear transformations that feel distant and settled, as if they belong to a world that no longer resembles ours. And because those transformations occurred over spans too vast for any individual to witness, they seem like something that ended rather than something that continues quietly. This feeling becomes stronger when we consider how different life is today compared to the conditions that shaped most of human history. We build heaters instead of growing extra insulation. We use glasses rather than allowing vision to become a biological filter. We use tools, knowledge, and medicine to sidestep problems that once carried extraordinary consequences. All of this gives the impression that we have stepped out of the current, that we stopped being shaped by the same forces that moulded us for millions of years. But the stillness we perceive isn't actually a sign that evolution has stopped. It's a sign that evolution often happens quietly, beneath the flow of daily life without announcing itself. The illusion comes from assuming that change must always look dramatic to be real, when in fact the most influential shifts happen in ways subtle enough to escape notice. Part of the illusion comes from how we understand time. Evolution operates on scales far longer than a single lifetime. We move through a few decades, maybe a century if we're lucky, while evolution stretches across thousands or millions of years. When you compare the pace of your life to the deep timeline of our species, the movement is so slow that it looks like stillness. But slow movement is still movement. Mountains shift so gradually that you might think they're immobile. Yet over long spans they rise, crumble, drift, and reshape entire continents. Evolution acts in a similar quiet, steady way. The rate may appear small, but it never reaches zero, regardless of how advanced our societies become. The gap between perception and reality widens even further, because most of us don't witness enough generations to see the underlying changes accumulate. We look at our parents and grandparents and notice how similar we are. Their features, their health, their behaviours resemble ours, so we assume the pattern holds indefinitely. But 3 generations tell only a fragment of the full story. If you were to compare yourself not just to recent relatives but to people living 10,000 years ago, you would see differences that weren't obvious in any single generation but became unmistakable across the full sweep of time. Another source of this illusion comes from the belief that evolution only happens when survival is difficult. Many imagine that early humans lived in constant danger, with nature pressing against them from all directions, while modern humans have escaped those pressures. This makes evolution seem like something tied only to extremes: scarcity, predators, harsh climates, deadly diseases. When those pressures soften, it's tempting to imagine the process ceasing entirely. But evolution isn't limited to moments of crisis. It is shaped just as much by everyday patterns as by rare threats. What influences survival and reproduction isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's tied to health differences that appear small in the moment but matter over a lifetime. Sometimes it's tied to behaviour, environment, or cultural norms. Sometimes it's tied to partner choice, which has always played a role in shaping populations. These forces don't disappear when life grows safer. They transform, becoming less violent but more intricate, woven into the choices people make without realising those choices echo into the next generation. A deep part of the illusion comes from the idea that evolution must follow a linear path. When people think about our species' history, they often imagine a ladder or a staircase, a climb toward increasing intelligence, increasing fitness, increasing capability. Once at the top, what's left for evolution to do? This misleads us into believing that a highly technological species represents the peak of evolution, a point beyond which there is no further upward direction. But evolution never aimed upward to begin with. It doesn't climb ladders or identify endpoints. It simply responds to whatever traits increase the odds of leaving descendants. In one era, that might mean strength or endurance. In another, it could mean disease resistance or cognitive ability. In another, it might mean tolerance to particular foods, ability to thrive in a specific environment, or resilience to new forms of stress. The forces shift, and populations shift with them. There is no final form to reach. If our environment continues to change, and it always does, our traits will continue to shift with it. Many people believe humans reached a stable form because of how rapidly cultural changes outpaced biological ones. Culture evolves at a breathtaking speed. In only a handful of generations, lifestyles can change completely. Agriculture rewrote human history in mere millennia. Industrialization reshaped society in a few centuries. Digital communication transformed daily life in a few decades. Biological evolution seems slow compared to all of that. But comparing biological timescales with cultural ones is like comparing the turning of the Earth to the speed of a passing car. The difference in scale makes one feel motionless, even when it is absolutely not. Culture's rapid acceleration masks the quieter biological changes still occurring underneath. Our biology is continually responding to the new conditions culture creates, even if the adjustments happen at a pace we can't see. Another element contributing to the illusion is how much humans intervene in their own survival. Medical technology prevents deaths that would once have been fatal. Food distribution systems allow people to live in environments they once couldn't survive. Glasses, braces, surgeries, medicines, and sanitation all reduce the selective pressures that acted fiercely upon past populations. Some assume that because these pressures are weaker, evolution stopped. But weaker doesn't mean non-existent. Even with modern interventions, differences in fertility, longevity, health, and reproductive timing still influence which traits continue. And even in a world with medicine, survival varies by region, lifestyle, and access. The pressures haven't been removed, they've become more complex, more subtle, more intertwined with social and environmental factors. We often overlook the fact that evolution can act on traits that have nothing to do with physical survival. Emotional patterns, behavioral tendencies, and cognitive characteristics can all influence reproductive outcomes. Social preferences, communication styles, and stress responses also vary across populations, and those differences may affect the likelihood of forming partnerships, raising children, or navigating the structures of society. In previous eras, survival pressures may have dominated evolutionary outcomes, but today the interplay between social behavior and reproduction has grown far more influential. When the importance of survival shifts, the importance of other traits rises. This doesn't slow evolution, it redistributes its focus. Another subtle contributor to the illusion is that modern humans are extremely mobile. Populations mix, disperse, and reconnect across vast distances. This movement blends genetics that were once geographically isolated. Blending increases diversity, which can mask the gradual shifts happening within the population. When everyone looks different from one another, it becomes difficult to perceive directional change. The variation around us creates a sense of randomness, a feeling that nothing is shifting because everything appears already varied. In reality, mixing populations doesn't eliminate evolution, it simply changes how it operates. Instead of producing strong localized adaptations in isolated groups, evolution may influence broader patterns across a larger interconnected population. There's another layer to consider. The pressures acting on humans are no longer uniform across the globe. For most of our history, groups lived under similar conditions, facing comparable challenges. Now, conditions differ dramatically from one region to another, from one lifestyle to another, from one economic structure to another. That means evolution isn't following one path, but many. It can look like stillness because there is no single direction for us to track. Instead, traits may be shifting in different ways in different populations, each following the pressures of their specific surroundings. When you step back, the lack of a single obvious trend feels like stasis, but the variation itself is evidence of movement. The sense of stillness also comes from our awareness. We understand evolution better now than at any other point in history, which ironically makes it feel more distant. Because we study fossils and ancient skulls, because we compare anatomical differences across time, because we plot timelines and examine early migrations, evolution becomes something historical, something catalogued, something explained. But evolution isn't a historical event. It's an ongoing process that operates whether we pay attention to it or not. The more we categorize the past, the more we mistakenly believe the present lies outside the same principles. Knowledge can create a strange disconnect, making the process feel complete simply because we've described so much of what has already happened. Another part of the illusion comes from the way we view ourselves compared to other species. When we observe animals evolving, bacteria developing resistance, birds changing their migratory routes, insects shifting colour in response to pollution, we acknowledge that evolution is active, but humans rarely see themselves through that same lens. We have become so deeply identified with our sense of agency, intelligence and innovation that we imagine ourselves separate from nature's processes. Once you view a species as exceptional, it becomes easy to imagine that the rules applying to every other life form no longer apply to us. But intelligence doesn't exempt a species from evolution. Nor does technology, culture, or self-awareness. These factors influence evolution, but they don't replace it. They change its direction, not its presence. Yet one more layer of stillness arises from the way modern humans measure change. We compare trends across short intervals because that's where our data is strongest. We study health changes over a few decades, fertility patterns over a few generations, population shifts within a century. But evolution doesn't always appear in such short windows. A trait might spread slowly, influenced by a combination of health, environment, diet, and preference that builds over many generations. Observing only short periods compresses the scale and hides the movement. It creates the impression that nothing significant is happening, because the changes are not yet large enough to stand out. But subtle change doesn't indicate absence. It indicates the beginning of a longer arc. All of these factors combine to create the sense that humans reached a plateau. But the stillness is an illusion born from mismatched timescales, shifting pressures, cultural complexity, and limited perspective. When you pull back far enough, the movement becomes clearer. Patterns in height, metabolism, disease resistance, reproductive timing, immune function, and countless other traits are shifting, even if the direction isn't immediately obvious. Our species is still responding to its environment, even as we reshape that environment ourselves. The pressures are gentler in some places and stronger in others, but they continue to guide the traits passed to future generations. Life today moves with a speed that would have been unimaginable to the people who came before us. We cross continents in hours, communicate across the world in an instant, and shift from one task to another so quickly that our days rarely leave space for pause. Everything around us seems to accelerate, from technology to culture to information. It creates a sense that progress is something rapid, something that leaps forward in bursts, something that transforms the world in a handful of years. And because we live inside that pace, we sometimes assume that any process moving more slowly must have fallen behind or faded away. Evolution becomes one of those things. Compared to the pace of our lives, evolution moves in a way that can feel almost motionless. The contrast is so stark that it becomes difficult to hold both ideas in mind at once. A world changing faster than we can process, and a biological process shifting so gradually that each generation looks nearly identical to the last. But evolution doesn't lose meaning just because it moves on a different time scale. Its slow, steady movement continues whether or not we feel it. And understanding that difference in pace is essential if we want to see how our species is still changing. Much of the confusion comes from the way humans tend to understand change. We measure our lives in minutes, hours, deadlines, and appointments. We measure innovation in years or decades. When we think about progress, we look for visible differences, new inventions, new discoveries, new ways of living that arrive quickly enough for us to notice. Biological change rarely fits that pattern. It works through small adjustments repeated across countless generations. The scale is so large that it becomes almost impossible for any single person to witness significant biological transformation. Yet the process continues regardless of whether we can observe it in real time. Comparing evolution to the pace of our lives is like comparing the shifting of continents to the traffic moving through a city. One appears static only because we're not designed to perceive movement at such a slow scale. It's helpful to think about this in terms of perspective. Imagine you're watching a very slow-moving tide. If you stand on the shore for a few minutes, it might seem like the water isn't moving at all, but if you return at the end of the day, the shoreline looks completely different. Evolution works with a similar quiet persistence. The change from one moment to the next is nearly invisible, but the cumulative effect is enormous. We tend to forget that the humans living 50,000 years ago were not identical to us in biology or behaviour. They were adapted to different diets, climates, diseases, and lifestyles. Their bodies, immune systems, and even their brain structures reflected pressures we no longer experience in quite the same way. Those differences weren't the result of sudden leaps. They unfolded one small step at a time. The rapid pace of modern life adds another layer to this contrast. Because technology evolves so quickly, we often feel as though our environment is changing faster than we can adapt to it. We invent tools, systems, and lifestyles that reshape our days, yet our biology remains tied to patterns formed long before cities, screens, and global networks existed. This creates a tension between who we are genetically and how we live socially. Many of the challenges people face today, stress, sedentary habits, dietary mismatches, sleep disruption, arise from this disconnect. The world we built is shifting at a pace evolution can't match, at least not in the short term. That mismatch might feel like a sign that evolution has stopped, but it is actually evidence that the process continues. Evolution doesn't preempt change. It responds to it slowly. The rapid transformation of our environment simply means that the pressures shaping future generations will differ from the pressures that shape previous ones. Another reason evolution seems slow compared to our lives is that the conditions shaping us no longer resemble the ones we evolved in. For most of human history, environmental pressures were external: climate, predators, food availability, disease. Today, the strongest pressures often come from cultural, social, and behavioural sources. These pressures change frequently, even within a single generation, which makes the relationship between environment and biology more complex. Biological evolution works best when pressures remain consistent for long periods. Cultural pressures, however, shift rapidly. A preference that affects reproduction in one generation might be irrelevant in the next. A lifestyle that influences health in one region might not apply elsewhere. This variability can make it appear as though evolution has nothing to act upon, when in reality it is constantly adjusting, just with a slower rhythm than culture sets. Technology amplifies this contrast even further. Because we have created tools that solve problems for us, we sometimes assume that biology no longer needs to adapt. Why would natural selection favour traits that help people survive cold temperatures when we have heating? Why would it favour sharp eyesight when we have corrective lenses? Why would it eliminate genes associated with certain diseases when medicine can intervene? It's easy to interpret these comforts as obstacles to evolution, but they are better understood as shifts in the type of pressures acting on us. Medicine does reduce the influence of some evolutionary pressures, yet it increases the influence of others. When survival becomes more uniform across a population, differences in reproduction become more relevant than differences in survival. That means traits associated with behaviour, preference, or social patterns may matter more now than traits associated with avoiding danger. Evolution doesn't speed up or slow down based on the presence of technology. It simply relies on the new pressures that emerge as we change our world. Another key difference between biological and cultural evolution is that culture is cumulative. Innovations stack on top of one another, accelerating the pace of change. A breakthrough in one generation becomes the foundation for new breakthroughs in the next, creating a cycle that can replace entire ways of living in just a few decades. But biological evolution does not stack in the same way. Each generation inherits traits from the one before it, but those traits cannot be replaced wholesale overnight. They can only shift gradually. Culture can reinvent itself. Biology must reshape itself slowly from what already exists. This fundamental difference in how the two types of change operate means that cultural evolution will almost always feel faster, more dramatic and more visible. But visibility doesn't determine importance. There's also the psychological effect of living in systems that emphasize speed. Many aspects of modern life encourage us to think in short-term cycles, daily schedules, quarterly goals, yearly plans. Even when we consider long-term change, we usually think in terms of a few decades. Evolution rarely produces noticeable transformation in such narrow windows. Our expectation that change must be quick and measurable leads us to overlook gradual shifts occurring quietly in the background. The slow pace of evolution doesn't make it irrelevant. It simply means that our typical ways of perceiving time don't align with the rhythm it follows. Another piece of this contrast lies in the way we pass down traits. Cultural traits can be transmitted horizontally, meaning they spread across people in the same generation. You can learn a new skill, adopt a new belief, or change a habit because you encountered it today. Biological traits, however, are transmitted vertically, from one generation to the next. That alone slows the process dramatically. A cultural idea can spread worldwide in days. A biological trait requires generations to stabilize within a population. When you put these side by side, cultural change feels like a dance moving in quick, sweeping motions, while biological change feels like a much slower movement, sometimes imperceptible but always present. Despite the difference in pace, culture can influence which biological traits continue. The way people form relationships, the environments they choose to live in, the work they do, the foods they eat, and the schedules they follow all affect health and reproduction. These connections may not be immediately obvious because they do not resemble the survival pressures of the past, but they shape evolutionary outcomes nonetheless. Culture can create new patterns that evolution responds to, even if the response is slow. The shift toward urban living, for example, introduces different environmental variables than the shift toward agrarian societies did. Pollution, stress, light exposure, and population density all can influence health in ways that may affect future generations. Even though we adjust to these conditions culturally, our bodies still engage with them biologically. There's also the question of generation length. Human beings have long lifespans compared to many species. A species that reproduces yearly can evolve much more rapidly than one, with generations separated by decades. Humans are constrained by biology in this way. Even if strong pressures existed today, the responses would unfold slowly because each generation takes a long time to emerge. When combined with the rapid pace of cultural change, this can make evolution feel outdated, as though it belongs to an earlier era. But humans have always evolved slowly because of this generational structure. It only seems strange now because everything else around us is sped up. The illusion that evolution has stopped is reinforced by the fact that our physical appearance seems stable. We see people who lived centuries ago in paintings, photographs, or descriptions, and they look familiar. Their features reflect ours. Their body shapes resemble ours. Their mannerisms are understandable. This creates a sense of continuity that hides the long-term changes in traits that are not immediately visible. Genetic differences are often subtle, affecting metabolism, disease resistance, reproductive timing, or cognitive tendencies in ways that aren't obvious from looking at a face. But these subtle shifts can significantly influence how future generations develop. Stability in appearance doesn't mean stability in evolution. It means that some traits change more quietly than others. Another important distinction between the slow dance of evolution and the fast pace of modern life is the difference in goals. Culture sets goals constantly. Produce faster, communicate faster, innovate faster. Evolution has no goals. It doesn't aim toward improvement, intelligence, longevity, or any other trait we value. It follows conditions rather than directing them. Because evolution is reactive rather than intentional, its pace does not accelerate to keep up with cultural expectations. This mismatch between intentional and unintentional change creates the feeling that evolution has stepped aside, even though it continues operating exactly as it always has, responding, not leading. Much of the tension between our fast lives and evolution's slow pace comes from how we interpret progress. Cultural progress can reverse quickly. Trends rise and fall. Systems change direction. Ideas are adopted and abandoned. Biological progress doesn't reverse as easily. Once a trait becomes common in a population, it tends to remain unless new pressures reshape it. That stability creates a sense of permanence, as though biology refuses to participate in the rapid shifts surrounding it. But biology has always been steady. It's culture that created a new, faster context. The most important thing to understand about this contrast is that the speed of our lives and the slowness of evolution are not in conflict. The two processes operate simultaneously, each with its own rhythm. Evolution's pace doesn't weaken because culture speeds up. Instead, evolution continues to respond to the environment we create, even if the environment changes more rapidly than biology can adapt to. Some of the challenges humans face today come from that mismatch, and those challenges may influence which traits become more or less common in future generations. The slow pace of evolution does not make it irrelevant in a fast world. It makes it foundational, shaping long-term patterns even as culture shapes the short-term ones. As we move deeper into how evolution interacts with modern life, understanding the difference in pace becomes essential. The world around us feels fast because we built systems that operate at extraordinary speeds. Evolution feels slow because it operates on scales beyond our direct experience. But slow processes can be powerful. They shape the story beneath the story, guiding populations even when individuals feel unchanged. When people imagine natural selection, they often picture a world that looks nothing like the one we live in now. They imagine ancient landscapes filled with unpredictable weather, scarce resources, dangerous animals, and constant threats. They picture early humans struggling to find food, competing for survival, and navigating environments that offered no comfort or protection. In that world, natural selection feels obvious. It feels harsh and immediate. The idea that only some individuals survived long enough to pass on their traits makes intuitive sense in those conditions. But when people look at modern life, that clarity seems to disappear. Cities, medicine, technology, and social systems create the impression that we have insulated ourselves from nature's pressures, that natural selection no longer plays any role in shaping who survives, who thrives, and who contributes their traits to future generations. This leads many to believe that natural selection has been paused or weakened to the point of irrelevance. But natural selection hasn't disappeared. It looks different now, because the world looks different. The pressures acting on humans have shifted, and with those shifts come new forms of selection that feel quieter, more subtle, and more closely tied to behaviour and lifestyle than to immediate danger. One of the most striking differences between the past and the present is the dramatic reduction in early mortality due to medicine and technology. Many of the conditions that once shaped our species, infectious diseases, injuries, complications during childbirth, nutritional deficiencies, can now be treated or prevented. This creates a sense that survival is uniform and no longer influenced by genetic differences. But the truth is more complicated. Even though far more people survive infancy, childhood and early adulthood than in the past, survival is still shaped by health, environment and genetics in ways that are less visible than before. Some individuals inherit traits that make them more susceptible to certain diseases, while others inherit traits that offer partial protection. Some individuals respond better to particular medications or treatments because of genetic variations affecting metabolism, immunity, or cellular behavior. These differences don't always determine survival directly, but they influence long-term health, longevity, and overall biological resilience, all of which play a role in shaping who is more likely to have children and how many children they have. Natural selection in the modern world also shows up in patterns of fertility rather than patterns of survival. In the past, reproductive success was heavily tied to staying alive, raising children, and protecting them in dangerous environments. Now, differences in reproduction are shaped by a wider set of factors. People choose when to have children, how many children to have, and whether to have children at all. These choices are influenced by economic conditions, cultural expectations, education, lifestyle, personal goals, and access to resources. But behind those choices lie biological differences that natural selection acts upon. Some individuals are more fertile than others due to genetic or hormonal factors. Some experience earlier or later onset of puberty. Some have medical conditions that influence fertility. Some have traits that indirectly affect their likelihood of finding a partner or forming long-term relationships. Natural selection operates on reproductive differences regardless of whether those differences arise from survival pressures, social pressures, or biological variation hidden beneath modern life. Another form of natural selection in the modern world emerges from the relationship between genetics and behavior. Our behavior influences almost every aspect of our lives: health, relationships, career paths, daily habits, and exposure to risks or environments. Many behaviors have genetic components, even though they are also shaped by culture and experience. Variations in impulsivity, risk-taking, stress responses, empathy, attention, and social behavior can all influence choices that affect reproduction. These behavioral tendencies do not determine outcomes, but they tilt the probabilities. Some individuals may be more inclined toward forming strong pair bonds, while others may be more inclined toward temporary or unstable relationships. Some may be more invested in parenting, while others may be less so. Some may choose large families, while others choose none. Each of these patterns carries potential genetic influence, and when patterns persist across generations, natural selection has a role in shaping them. Health differences that used to result in early death now often result in chronic conditions that influence other aspects of life. Chronic illness can affect fertility, pregnancy outcomes, long-term energy levels, and the ability to invest time or resources in raising children. Traits that predispose individuals to health issues may reduce reproductive success, even if they no longer reduce survival in the way they once did. Similarly, traits that improve metabolic efficiency, immune function, or cardiovascular health may offer subtle reproductive advantages over long spans of time. These are not dramatic pressures, but natural selection does not require dramatic events. It requires only consistent differences in who leaves descendants. Diet plays a significant role in shaping natural selection today. Modern diets vary widely across the world, and different populations face different nutritional challenges. Some people inherit traits that allow them to process certain foods more efficiently. Others inherit traits that increase susceptibility to conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or obesity when exposed to high-calorie diets. These conditions may influence longevity and fertility, creating subtle evolutionary pressures. Populations that have access to certain foods for many generations may develop metabolic traits that differ from populations with entirely different diets. Lactase persistence, which allows adults to digest dairy, is a well-known example of this. But modern dietary shifts may create similar pressures that will not become noticeable until many generations have passed. The modern environment brings another set of pressures related to chemicals, pollutants, and artificial structures. Cities expose people to air pollution, noise pollution, artificial lights, and microplastics, which influence health in complex ways. Some individuals may have genetic variants that allow them to tolerate pollution better, while others may be more vulnerable. These differences can affect lung function, cardiovascular health, immune responses, and reproductive success over the long term. Modern buildings, work environments, and sleep patterns also create pressures tied to circadian rhythms. Some individuals naturally adjust better to irregular hours, artificial lighting, and disrupted sleep, while others experience health consequences. These differences may gradually influence evolutionary outcomes, even if the effects are subtle in the short term. Partner selection in the modern world introduces another method through which natural selection continues. Humans do not choose partners randomly. Traits such as appearance, personality, intelligence, emotional stability, ambition, kindness, and social behavior all influence partner choice. These preferences can vary across cultures, but patterns still emerge. If certain traits consistently lead to higher rates of forming stable relationships or having children, those traits will become more common in future generations. Partner choice has always influenced evolution, but modern life amplifies its importance because survival differences are less dramatic than before. Where nearly everyone survives to adulthood, the traits that influence partner selection and reproductive decisions become more central to natural selection. Global travel and mobility contribute to natural selection by widening the pool of potential partners. People who would never have crossed paths in the past now form families together. This blending increases genetic diversity, which can enhance resilience against diseases and environmental stresses. But it also means that certain traits spread more easily than before. Variants that once existed only in isolated populations now appear worldwide. Greater diversity can mask evolutionary change in the short term because variation becomes more widespread, but the long-term effect is a more interconnected genetic landscape where selection acts across broader populations. Disease continues to shape natural selection even in a world with advanced medicine. Some individuals possess genetic traits that make them more resilient to particular infections, while others are more susceptible. Seasonal illnesses, viral infections, and autoimmune conditions all involve genetic factors that influence how the body responds. While medicine reduces mortality, it cannot eliminate the biological differences that affect recovery, long-term health, or resilience. These differences can influence reproductive outcomes indirectly, shaping which traits persist. Additionally, new diseases emerge regularly, and populations must adapt to them over generations. The pressures created by modern pathogens differ from those of the past, but they are pressures nonetheless. Stress plays a major role in shaping health and reproductive patterns in the modern world. Life today exposes people to chronic stresses that affect different individuals in different ways. Some people cope well with rapid change, constant stimulation, social complexity, and demanding schedules. Others experience significant health effects, from anxiety to sleep disruption to metabolic changes. Traits that influence stress resilience may play an increasing role in natural selection, because chronic stress affects fertility, longevity, and overall well-being. A world moving at high speed creates new pressures that reward certain psychological traits more than others. The environment we choose for ourselves also matters. People move to cities, work indoors, spend hours sitting, interact with large social networks, and structure their days around artificial schedules. These lifestyle patterns create pressures tied to physical activity, sunlight exposure, social behavior, and mental health. Some individuals thrive in dense social environments, others thrive in quieter ones. Some adjust easily to digital communication, others struggle with its pace. These differences, while driven partly by culture, often have biological influences. Over many generations, such influences can shape the direction of evolutionary change. Another area where natural selection remains active is reproductive timing. People today have children at vastly different ages depending on region, lifestyle, and personal choice. Age of first childbirth influences the number of descendants a person leaves. Some individuals naturally reach puberty earlier or later, influenced partly by genetics. Earlier puberty has been linked to increased reproductive output in certain contexts, while later puberty is linked to different health outcomes. These patterns may influence evolutionary trends, but the effects unfold slowly. Even the decision to have children interacts with biology. Certain traits make people more inclined toward parenthood, whether through nurturing tendencies, social behaviour, or long-term planning habits. Traits connected to patience, cooperation, and emotional regulation may indirectly influence reproductive outcomes when examined across populations and generations. Again, these are not immediate pressures, but natural selection does not require immediacy. The perception that natural selection no longer operates often comes from the assumption that survival pressures must be strong, harsh, or uniform. Modern life has reduced some pressures, but it has created new ones that are more diverse, more behavioural, and more subtle. Natural selection can act through fertility more than survival. It can act through health differences that influence long-term outcomes. It can act through partner choice, cultural patterns, environmental exposures, and psychological traits. Modern humans experience a complex web of pressures rather than a single dominant one, which makes natural selection harder to see, but no less present. What natural selection looks like today is not a version of the past scaled down. It is a deeply interconnected relationship between biology, behaviour, culture, environment, and technology. The pressures are smaller and more varied, but they accumulate over time, shaping future generations just as surely as early environmental challenges shaped our ancestors. Recognizing these modern pressures helps us understand that evolution does not pause when life becomes easier. It adapts to the conditions we create, responding to our choices, our environments, and our differences. Modern medicine changed human life so profoundly that it's difficult to imagine the world that existed before it. For most of human history, survival depended on a fragile balance between health, environment, and chance. A small cut could become infected and deadly. A difficult birth could end a life before it began. A simple fever could sweep through a community with no way to stop it. These pressures shaped our ancestors for countless generations, influencing which traits allowed people not only to survive, but to raise children who carried those traits forward. When medicine entered the picture, many of those pressures softened, and because they softened, it often appears as though natural selection stepped to the side, no longer shaping us in the same way. But when we look closely at what changed and what didn't, we find that medicine didn't remove evolution's influence. It simply altered the texture of the pressures acting on our species. The edges became less sharp, less immediate, and less terrifying, but the underlying process continued. Before medicine, the forces that shaped survival were deeply unforgiving. Injuries that today seem minor could quickly become fatal. Childbirth was dangerous for both parent and infant. Diseases we now cure routinely were once among the most common causes of death. Life expectancy was short, not because people aged quickly, but because the risks of dying young were high. These early pressures created a world where small biological differences in immune strength, healing ability, or resistance to certain pathogens had enormous consequences. Individuals who happened to carry beneficial genetic variations were more likely to survive long enough to reproduce. Others might not, even if the differences between them were subtle. This concentrated the effects of natural selection, producing changes in populations that reflected the conditions of the time. As medicine developed, those immediate survival pressures began to ease. The invention of vaccines, antibiotics, antiseptics, and surgical techniques dramatically reduced early mortality. Diseases that once swept through families and communities with devastating consequences were gradually brought under control. Childbirth became safer. Injuries became manageable. People who would not have survived in previous eras now lived full lives. It's here that the illusion arises, the belief that natural selection lost its grip once medicine stepped in to protect us. But easing one type of pressure does not eliminate all pressures. It shifts the balance, making some factors less important and others more influential. One of the clearest changes brought by medicine is the reduction of selective pressure on traits directly tied to early survival. Genes that once offered life or death advantages no longer determine outcomes as starkly as they did in the past. Immune variations that protected people from ancient infections matter less when vaccines prevent those infections in the first place. Traits that improved healing mattered less when surgery and antibiotics can address injuries and infections that would once have been fatal. Even conditions that caused early death in past generations can now be treated or managed, allowing individuals to live long enough to have children. These changes lead some to argue that humanity has stepped outside evolution entirely, but that assumption overlooks what replaced those pressures. Medicine softened the harshness of early mortality, but the modern world introduced new pressures tied to chronic health, reproduction, and longevity. While far more people now survive childhood, the question of who goes on to have children is shaped by a wider variety of factors than before. Chronic illnesses influenced by modern lifestyles, heart disease, diabetes, certain cancers, autoimmune disorders can affect fertility, long-term health, and lifespan. Genetic variations that predispose someone to certain conditions may not prevent survival outright, but they can influence how life unfolds over time. Modern medicine can save lives, but it cannot eliminate the biological differences that influence long-term resilience, reproductive timing, or overall health. Natural selection adapts to the new landscape by acting on the traits that remain connected to reproductive outcomes, rather than on the ones that used to dominate. Another way medicine shifted natural selection involves reproductive technology. Treatments such as in vitro fertilization, hormone therapies, and assisted reproductive methods allow people with certain fertility challenges to have children. This introduces a new layer of complexity, because traits that once prevented reproduction may now persist. However, this doesn't stop evolution. It changes the set of traits available for future generations. Evolution has never been a moral accountant removing traits that are unfit. It simply follows the patterns of reproduction. If medical technology allows certain traits to remain in the gene pool, then those traits continue within a new context, one shaped not by nature alone, but by culture, technology, and human intent. Over time, this creates a different evolutionary landscape, but not an absence of evolution itself. Medicine also changed selective pressure by extending human lifespan. When people live longer, the window of reproductive opportunity widens in some cases and narrows in others. Long life allows individuals to contribute more to child rearing, social structures, and community stability, all of which can influence the survival and success of their offspring. Certain traits associated with longevity, metabolic efficiency, cellular maintenance, cardiovascular resilience, may quietly become more significant in shaping which individuals leave descendants. This doesn't mean survival is a competition in the traditional sense, but rather that long-term health, especially health that influences the ability to raise children or support families, now plays a bigger evolutionary role than sudden early mortality once did. One of the less obvious ways medicine shifts natural selection is through its impact on environmental pressures. Modern life introduces new exposures that past populations never faced: pollution, chemicals, artificial materials, new pathogens, and light pollution that alters sleep patterns. Medicine helps manage some of the consequences, but not all. Individuals vary in how their bodies handle pollutants, allergens, chronic inflammation, and stress. Some people adapt better than others to artificial environments. These differences can influence health and reproductive outcomes gradually, creating new evolutionary pressures that did not exist before. Medicine protects us, but it cannot remove the influence of the environments we create. Another important dimension is mental health. In the past, psychological traits that influence survival often related directly to immediate dangers or the ability to navigate harsh environments. Today, mental health interacts with technology, social structures, and lifestyle in complex ways. Conditions related to neurodiversity, mood regulation, anxiety, attention, and resilience all influence life in the modern world through education, work, relationships, and reproductive decisions. Some traits that would have been disadvantageous in ancient environments now offer advantages in specialized modern niches, while others become more challenging due to mismatches with technology or society. Medicine has softened some psychological pressures, but has not removed the influence of biological differences on how people navigate social and emotional landscapes. These influences quietly shape which traits persist across generations. Another subtle way medicine interacts with evolution involves pregnancy and childbirth. Historically, childbirth posed enormous risks. Pelvic shape, fetal size, and other anatomical factors had strong evolutionary consequences. Modern obstetrics dramatically reduced those risks, allowing a wider range of pelvic sizes and fetal traits to persist. Once again, this doesn't stop evolution. It alters which traits pass forward, creating a broader spectrum of variation. Over time, such shifts can influence long-term patterns of human development in ways that will only become clear many generations from now. Some people interpret the reduction of mortality as the end of natural selection, but selection is not only about death, it's about differences in reproductive success. Even in a world where nearly everyone survives to adulthood, not everyone has the same number of children or any children at all. These variations arise from many interconnected factors: biology, behavior, culture, personal choice, health, and opportunity. Medicine's ability to save lives does not change the fact that differences in fertility continue. Those differences still shape evolutionary outcomes. People sometimes overlook this because fertility patterns today are influenced heavily by culture, education, and access to resources, but cultural influences do not exist independently of biology. They interact with it. Traits that influence behavior, risk tolerance, long-term planning, social preferences, emotional regulation may affect who starts families earlier, who has larger families, and who decides not to have children. Medicine does not erase these influences. Medicine also introduced new evolutionary dynamics through vaccination. Vaccines reduce mortality from infectious diseases, but they also create selective pressures on pathogens themselves. That's one part of the story. The other part involves how human immune responses vary. Some individuals respond more strongly to vaccines, others respond less effectively. Over long spans of time, traits influencing immune function may continue to shape human populations, even if the threats that once defined those traits have faded or transformed. Medicine changes the rules of the game, but there is still a game. The softening of survival pressures can also create indirect evolutionary changes through what scientists call relaxed selection. When a harmful trait no longer causes early death or prevents reproduction, it can persist. Over time, this may increase genetic diversity within a population. Increased diversity, however, offers raw material for future evolutionary change. Traits that serve no particular purpose now may become relevant under future conditions, whether due to environmental shifts, new diseases, or changes in society. Relaxed selection does not halt evolution. It builds potential. Some argue that because medicine allows more individuals to survive and reproduce, evolution slows. But slowing is not stopping. Slow evolution still shapes populations. The rate changes, but the direction continues. And in some cases, selection can even intensify around traits that interact with modern conditions, traits tied to stress resilience, metabolic health, reproductive timing, or adaptation to urban environments. Medicine reduced the intensity of ancient pressures, but the modern world created new ones. There's also a social dimension to consider. People live longer now, giving them more time to influence their families, communities, and future generations. Behaviours, values, and support systems passed down across extended lifespans can affect the survival and success of children and grandchildren. While cultural transmission is not biological evolution, the two processes interact. Cultural traits can influence reproductive outcomes as strongly as biological traits, and when culture shapes biology, the line between them becomes blurred. Medicine softened the harsh edges of survival, but it did not remove the underlying heartbeat of natural selection. Instead, it created a world where selection acted through long-term health rather than immediate threats, through fertility rather than early mortality, through lifestyle interactions rather than environmental extremes. It shifted the pressures that shape our species from sudden dangers to prolonged influences. We moved from a world where survival was the barrier to reproduction into a world where reproduction itself, shaped by countless biological and cultural factors, is the primary evolutionary filter. The role of medicine becomes a central turning point. It marks the moment when the forces shaping human populations changed direction. And understanding those shifts helps us see how evolution continues quietly through every generation, even in a world where the dangers once shaping life have softened into a more complex landscape of influences that stretch across years rather than moments. Technology reshaped human life so thoroughly and so quickly that it became one of the strongest forces acting on our species, even though it operates in ways very different from the pressures that shaped us in the past. When people think about evolution, they usually imagine nature sculpting our ancestors through climate, predators, disease, and scarcity. But today, one of the dominant influences on our biology and behaviour comes from the tools we build, the environments we create with those tools, and the new patterns of living that emerge around them. Technology changed the conditions of daily life so drastically that it now functions as a kind of selective pressure of its own. It alters how we work, how we communicate, how we sleep, how we move, how we choose partners, and how we raise children. Even if technology doesn't directly modify our DNA, it changes the landscape in which humans live, and evolution always follows the landscape. A strange thing happens when technology becomes central to survival and success. The traits that mattered to our ancestors, strength, endurance, physical speed, sensory sharpness, lose some of their influence. A person can thrive today without exceptional physical resilience. Machines lift objects that once required muscle. Vehicles replace long-distance walking. Tools make manual tasks less demanding. Glasses correct vision. Hearing aids correct hearing. And digital devices handle tasks that once depended entirely on memory, navigation skills, or constant attention. When tools absorb responsibilities once handled by biological traits, the selective pressure on those traits decreases. But that doesn't mean evolution stops. It means the pressures shift toward different areas, toward traits that help individuals manage complex technology, navigate dense information flows, or adapt to environments shaped by screens, networks, and artificial rhythms. Technology influences human cognition in subtle but significant ways. Modern life demands skills our ancestors rarely needed: the ability to process information rapidly, multitask, filter distractions, learn new interfaces, and adapt to constantly changing tools can affect education, career paths, and long-term opportunities. These opportunities in turn influence who forms stable relationships, who has children, and when those children are born. Differences in cognitive flexibility, attention patterns, problem-solving approaches, working memory, and stress tolerance can lead to different life trajectories. Technology reshapes the environment in which these cognitive traits matter. And over many generations, environments that reward certain traits can influence how common those traits become. Another area where technology affects evolution is social behaviour. Humans evolved in small groups where face-to-face communication shaped social bonds. Today, Many relationships form, develop, or dissolve through digital interactions. Messaging platforms, video calls, social media, and online communities shape how people meet and maintain connections. Traits that make someone comfortable with digital communication might influence their ability to build and sustain relationships in modern contexts. People who struggle in digital environments may face challenges in forming social networks or finding partners, even if they possess strong interpersonal skills in person. Technology doesn't determine these patterns on its own, but it creates conditions where certain traits play a larger role in social outcomes. Partner choice in the digital age introduces another layer. Dating platforms allow people to set preferences, filter potential partners, and communicate without physical proximity. This increases the influence of personal taste, values, and communication style. Traits that appeal to larger groups on these platforms may become more represented over time simply because they lead to more pairings. Traits that used to matter, such as proximity, physical endurance, or community-specific roles, matter less now. Traits tied to emotional expression, humour, empathy, or digital communication skills may matter more. These shifts alter the landscape of partner selection, and partner selection always shapes evolution. Technology also affects human mobility, which influences evolutionary patterns by blending genetic lineages that once developed in isolation. Transportation networks allow people to move between countries and continents with ease, increasing genetic diversity within populations. This diversity can obscure short-term evolutionary trends, but creates long-term resilience by broadening the range of traits available for future selection. Meanwhile, increased mobility also spreads cultural practices that influence reproductive patterns, such as norms around family size, parenting, and career choices. These cultural influences interact with biology to shape long-term population patterns. Another major influence technology has on evolution involves sleep. Human bodies evolved in a world governed by the rising and setting of the sun. Artificial light changed that world radically. Screens, lamps, and irregular schedules extend wakefulness far into the night. Some people adjust easily to late hours, irregular sleep, or nighttime work. Others are more sensitive to light exposure, circadian disruption, or inconsistent routines. These differences can affect mood, metabolism, and long-term health. Over generations, if certain traits help individuals cope better with artificial schedules, those traits may become more common. The world we built rewards those who can function well in environments filled with digital stimulation, artificial light, and constant information. Evolution follows what the environment rewards. Technology also shapes human behavior through constant access to food. Early humans experienced cycles of scarcity and abundance. Modern humans experience abundance almost all the time. This shift affects metabolism, body composition, and health patterns. Some individuals inherit traits that respond poorly to constant access to high-calorie foods. Others have metabolic variations that offer resilience in this environment. As diets remain consistent over generations, metabolic traits suited to modern food availability may gradually become more common, while traits better suited to scarcity may decline in influence. Medicine interacts with these patterns, but it does not eliminate the underlying differences that influence reproductive and health outcomes. Another part of technology shaping evolution involves physical activity. Humans evolved for movement, walking long distances, climbing, carrying, building. Today, many jobs involve sitting for most of the day. Some individuals tolerate sedentary life better. Others experience significant health consequences. Patterns of physical activity shaped by technology can influence cardiovascular health, fertility, and longevity. Over long periods, differences in how individuals respond to inactivity may contribute to evolutionary trends, especially if certain traits consistently influence reproductive patterns or long-term health. Technology also affects emotional and psychological traits by creating environments filled with rapid stimuli, constant comparison, social evaluation, and artificial rewards. Some people thrive in stimulating digital environments. Others struggle with anxiety, distraction, or emotional overload. Technology shapes which traits are beneficial or challenging in everyday life. Individuals who cope well with fast-paced digital environments may navigate modern life more successfully, affecting career opportunities, relationship stability, and other factors connected to reproductive outcomes. Over time, these subtle differences could influence which traits become more common within populations. Another dimension involves cognitive expectations. Modern life rewards individuals who can learn new systems quickly, follow complex procedures, adapt to changing tasks, and handle high cognitive loads. The ability to read, write, analyze, and reason abstractly is now essential, whereas these abilities were far less critical in early human societies. Cognitive traits are influenced by both genetics and environment. As modern environments increasingly reward certain cognitive abilities, those traits may become more influential in shaping life outcomes and reproductive patterns. Evolution follows the pressures that persist across generations, not the pressures that vanish within a single lifetime. Even emotional traits interact with technology. Patience, attention span, and impulse control all influence how people interact with digital environments. Some individuals naturally regulate impulses well, while others find it more difficult. Technology amplifies the consequences of these differences by providing constant opportunities for distraction, reward, or stimulation. Over multiple generations, traits that support healthy navigation of these environments, such as the ability to manage attention or regulate emotions, might influence longevity, stability, or family formation. These influences won't lead to immediate biological changes, but they shape the long-term environment where evolution operates. Technology also affects human bodies in ways that are not strictly genetic but still influence evolutionary outcomes. Wearable devices, medical implants, and assisted technologies allow individuals with certain conditions to thrive. This expands the range of traits that persist within populations. At the same time, new technologies expose people to artificial chemicals, materials, and conditions that humans have never encountered before. Some individuals handle these exposures better than others. Over many generations, these differences may influence evolutionary outcomes through long-term health patterns. Even the structure of modern work contributes to new evolutionary pressures. Jobs that reward social cooperation, communication skills, or emotional resilience may create conditions where individuals with those traits succeed more in long-term life outcomes. Meanwhile, jobs that require long hours, irregular schedules, or sustained focus may reward individuals with strong stress tolerance. None of these factors directly determine reproduction, but each one shapes the trajectories of individuals and communities in ways that interact with fertility patterns, lifestyle choices, and long-term health. The key insight is that technology doesn't replace evolution. It changes the rules shaping our environment, and evolution always responds to the environment. When technology shifts how people live, it shifts the pressures acting on their bodies and minds. Some pressures become stronger, others weaker, and new pressures emerge altogether. Humans no longer face the same dangers our ancestors did, but they face new forms of complexity: social, cognitive, emotional, and environmental. These pressures may not resemble the ones that shaped early humans, but they still influence who thrives, who struggles, and who passes on their traits. Technology has become one of the most powerful sculptors of human life, not by rewriting our genes directly, but by altering the conditions that influence how those genes express themselves, interact with the environment, and shape reproductive patterns. The changes it creates unfold slowly, but they build across generations. And as technology continues to evolve, the world it shapes will guide the future of human evolution in ways we're only beginning to understand. Culture moves with a speed that biology cannot match, and that difference in pace has become one of the defining features of modern human life. When we talk about how humans evolve, we often focus on genes, anatomy, and physical traits passed from one generation to the next. But there is another form of evolution unfolding all around us, operating on a timescale so fast and so flexible that it changes within a single lifetime. That is cultural evolution, the transformation of ideas, values, habits, norms, technologies, languages, and ways of living. Cultural evolution moves so rapidly that it often outruns biological change, reshaping the environments we inhabit far more quickly than our bodies can adapt. This creates a widening gap between the world we're built for and the world we actually live in, a gap that influences how we behave, how we think, how we raise children, and how we survive in ways that aren't always visible moment to moment. To understand why cultural evolution moves so quickly, it helps to look at how human societies function. Unlike biological traits, which require generations to shift, cultural traits can spread instantly. A new idea can travel from one person to millions in a matter of hours. A new technology can transform the behavior of entire populations within a decade. Entire economies, communication systems, and belief structures can shift dramatically within a single human lifetime. And because culture changes so rapidly, it constantly creates new conditions for biological evolution to respond to. The tension between the two processes, the fast pace of culture and the slow pace of biology, shapes many of the challenges and adaptations we face today. Cultural evolution does not follow the same rules as biological evolution. Traits aren't passed down through DNA. They are learned, imitated, shared, modified, and sometimes discarded. A cultural trait can spread because it is useful, or convincing, or emotionally appealing, or simply fashionable. And once a cultural trait becomes established, it can influence almost every aspect of life, including survival, reproduction, social structure, and the environments future generations grow up in. When cultures change faster than biology can respond, people find themselves navigating lives their bodies weren't built for, relying on behaviours and technologies to bridge the gap. Consider something as simple as daily structure. For most of human history, people lived according to natural cycles: sunrise, sunset, seasonal changes, food availability, and environmental rhythms. Biological functions such as sleep, metabolism, and energy levels evolved around those cycles. But cultural changes altered these rhythms completely. Artificial lighting extended the day far beyond sunset. Work shifts and social expectations created schedules unrelated to natural cycles. Digital screens introduced continuous stimulation at all hours. These cultural shifts happened within a few generations, far too quickly for biological evolution to adjust. As a result, many people struggle with sleep, stress, and energy in ways that reflect a mismatch between ancient biological rhythms and modern expectations. Diet provides another clear example. Humans evolved in environments where food variety was limited, resources were unpredictable, and calorie-dense foods were rare. Bodies adapted to store energy efficiently, to crave sweetness, and to slow metabolism during scarcity. But cultural evolution created agriculture, food storage, cooking methods, global trade, and eventually processed foods available year-round. These changes happened rapidly relative to evolutionary time. The result is a world where ancient metabolic traits collide with constant access to high-calorie foods. Some individuals respond to this mismatch with health challenges, while others adapt more smoothly. Over many generations, these differences may shape biological evolution, but the cultural leap happened long before biology had a chance to catch up. Family structure offers another example of cultural evolution outpacing biology. For most of human history, humans lived in small groups where child-rearing responsibilities were shared. Today, many families raise children in isolated households, or under very different social conditions. These shifts affect stress, support systems, and parenting styles. They influence decisions about when to have children, how many to have, and how parents divide responsibilities. All of these factors shape reproductive patterns even though they are driven by cultural norms rather than biological necessity. Cultural evolution created a social environment that differs dramatically from the one human biology evolved within. Education systems also illustrate this tension. Humans evolved to learn through exploration, imitation, and practical engagement with the environment. Formal schooling, abstract learning, and extended academic training are relatively recent cultural developments. They shape cognitive development, life trajectories, and reproductive timing. Individuals who thrive under these cultural conditions may follow very different life paths than those who struggle with them, affecting fertility patterns and partner choice. Again, biology plays a role, but culture sets the stage at a pace biology cannot match. Urbanization highlights another area where cultural evolution outpaces biological adaptation. Humans evolved in open landscapes, small groups, and environments filled with natural cues. Modern cities introduce dense populations, constant noise, artificial light, pollution, and highly structured social interactions. Some people adjust to these conditions easily, while others experience stress, anxiety, or sensory overload. Even though modern environments can be navigated successfully, they still challenge biological traits shaped under entirely different conditions. Cultural change created a world that rewards specific traits, and over many generations those traits may become more common. But for now, the cultural shift far outstrips the biological response. Work culture is another powerful force. Early humans engaged in varied physical tasks throughout the day. Today, many jobs involve long periods of sitting, repetitive movements, or high cognitive demands. Sedentary behavior has consequences for health, metabolism, and longevity. People vary in how well they cope with these conditions, and those differences may influence who remains healthy enough to have children and who experiences long-term challenges. Cultural change reshaped what counts as productivity, altering the relationship between daily activities and biological needs in ways that evolution hasn't fully reconciled. Technology magnifies cultural evolution further by accelerating communication and the spread of ideas. A new app, platform, or device can transform daily life globally within months. These shifts influence memory, attention, social networks, and stress levels. For example, constant connectivity creates social pressure to be available and responsive at all times. Some individuals adapt to this quickly, while others find it draining. Variations in attention span, impulse control, and emotional regulation influence how people engage with digital environments. These traits have biological components but are shaped by cultural conditions that change far too rapidly for biology to fully match. Cultural evolution can also change what traits are valued in society. For much of human history, physical strength, endurance, and resilience were vital. As culture shifted toward intellectual, creative, and emotional capacities, different traits became advantageous. Communication skills, empathy, cooperation, and problem-solving became more central to success in many environments. These changes in valued traits influence partner choice, social status, and economic opportunities, which indirectly shape reproductive patterns. Biology adapts to these trends slowly, but cultural norms surrounding them can change from one generation to the next. Language is one of the fastest moving aspects of cultural evolution. New words, phrases, dialects, and communication styles emerge constantly. Language shapes thought, behavior, and connection. It influences how people form communities and how cultures are transmitted. Biological adaptation can only follow the human capacity for language, but cultural evolution continuously reshapes the content and usage of that language. The rapid evolution of digital communication, the shift from letters to emails to text messages to emojis and beyond, illustrates how quickly cultural tools for communication, outpace biological processing systems. Another major area where cultural evolution accelerates beyond biology is social norms. Ideas surrounding marriage, gender roles, education, career expectations, individuality, community involvement and lifestyle change dramatically over short spans of time. These norms influence reproductive patterns directly. Delayed childbearing, voluntary childlessness, family planning, and dual career households all result from cultural shifts rather than biological changes. These cultural patterns influence which traits persist, but biology responds only through the indirect path of who has children and when. The gap between cultural control and biological response widens with each generation. The rapid spread of information also shapes the interplay between culture and biology. Humans evolved to learn from a small number of trusted individuals. Today, people are exposed to countless sources of information, advice, opinions, and social cues daily. This constant input influences stress, decision-making, social dynamics, and emotional well-being. People vary in how they process large amounts of information, and those variations have both biological and cultural components. Over time, individuals who navigate information-rich environments successfully may have different life outcomes than those who struggle with them. But the cultural shift toward information saturation outpaced biological adaptation completely. One of the most important consequences of cultural evolution outrunning biological change is the emergence of mismatches, conditions where biology expects one environment, but culture provides another. These mismatches explain many challenges of modern life: anxiety, depression, sleep problems, metabolic disorders, attention difficulties, and chronic stress often reflect the tension between fast-changing cultural expectations and slow-changing biological foundations. While individuals can adapt behaviourally, biological adaptation takes far longer. This creates a period where culture continually reshapes the environment and biology continually struggles to keep pace. Cultural evolution also shapes moral systems, laws, norms of cooperation, and ideas about fairness. These systems influence how people treat one another, how communities are organised, and how resources are distributed. Over generations, these decisions influence survival and reproduction indirectly. They affect who grows up with stability, who gains access to resources, and who successfully raises children. Cultural norms influence biological outcomes, but because culture can shift within a decade or two, biology cannot align with new norms quickly enough to eliminate mismatches. Despite the dizzying pace of cultural change, biology does not stay still. Over long spans of time, the environment created by cultural evolution will shape biological evolution. Traits that help individuals thrive in technology-rich, socially complex environments may become more common. Traits that create difficulties in navigating these environments may gradually decline. But because cultural changes are so rapid, the environment biology responds to may shift again before biological changes become noticeable. This creates a moving target that evolution continuously chases but never fully reaches. Understanding this tension helps explain why human evolution appears subtle today, even though it continues. Culture changes dramatically in a single lifetime. Biology changes gradually across many lifetimes. When one process outruns the other, the landscape in which humans live becomes more dynamic than the bodies navigate in it. The gap between the two processes shapes the challenges, opportunities, and adaptations of modern human life. Culture can reshape environments so quickly that evolution must constantly adjust to new conditions. And even though biology moves slowly, it always responds to whatever world culture creates. The interplay between these forces continues to guide the trajectory of our species, revealing a story in which rapid change and slow adaptation coexist, constantly shaping one another through every generation. It's easy to assume that because modern life feels stable on the surface, the biology beneath that surface must be stable too. We look in the mirror and see a face that wouldn't seem out of place a few centuries ago. We watch old photographs or films and recognise expressions, gestures and mannerisms that feel familiar. We compare ourselves to our parents and grandparents and notice similarities more often than differences. That sense of continuity can make it seem as though our genes settled into a fixed pattern at some point in our past, as if evolution reached a calm plateau and simply stayed there. But beneath the quietness of our daily lives, our genes never stop shifting. They continue to reflect the pressures acting on our species, even when those pressures are subtle or invisible from one generation to the next. Human evolution didn't pause. It simply moved into a rhythm that is easy to overlook unless we pay close attention to the small, steady changes accumulating over time. To understand how genes continue to shift, it helps to remember what genes actually represent. They are not rigid blueprints dictating every detail of our bodies. They are sets of instructions that interact with environment, diet, stress lifestyle, and countless internal processes to shape how we grow, develop, age, and reproduce. They respond to the world we live in, and the world today is not the same one humans lived in even a few centuries ago. Every shift in environment or behaviour creates new selective pressures, even if those pressures don't resemble the ones our distant ancestors faced. When people say humans stopped evolving, they're often looking for sweeping anatomical changes, dramatic differences in height, skull shape, or physical structure. But evolution rarely works through such dramatic leaps. Most genetic change happens quietly, influencing traits that don't announce themselves through immediate visual differences. One of the clearest signs that our genes continue shifting is the ongoing adaptation of human populations to specific environmental conditions. Altitude tolerance provides a well-known example. People living in high-altitude regions such as the Andes, Tibet, or parts of Ethiopia developed genetic variants that support efficient oxygen use, improved blood flow, or altered red blood cell production. These adaptations did not appear in the distant past. They emerged within the span of several thousand years, and some changes may be even more recent. These genetic shifts demonstrate how quickly evolution can respond when populations face a consistent environmental challenge. The fact that such adaptations continue today shows that our genes remain malleable, adjusting to the specific conditions people encounter across the world. Diet continues to shape genetics as well. Lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk in adulthood, developed independently in several populations after the domestication of animals. But this change is not ancient in the sense of deep, evolutionary time. It emerged within the last 10,000 years and continues to change in frequency across different regions. Populations with long histories of dairy consumption tend to have higher rates of lactase persistence, while others do not. This ongoing variation shows that dietary pressures still influence gene frequencies. And as global diets shift in new directions, with processed foods, artificial ingredients, and nutritional patterns that would have been unthinkable for earlier generations, our genes will respond over many generations to the conditions we consistently present to them. Genes tied to immunity also continue to evolve. Pathogens change, environments shift, and global travel introduces new exposures at a pace that surpasses anything in our evolutionary past. Some genetic variants that offered protection against ancient diseases persist, while others become less relevant as new illnesses spread. Variations affecting immune responses differ across populations because the pathogen landscapes they encountered historically were different. But even now, slight immune differences influence how individuals respond to infections, vaccines, and inflammatory conditions. These variations affect health, longevity, and reproductive patterns, which means they continue to shape the distribution of immune-related genes in the population. The shifting landscape of disease ensures that human immunity remains an arena of active evolutionary change. Another area where genes continue to shift involves metabolism. Populations with long histories of food scarcity sometimes carry genetic variants that support efficient energy storage. These traits may have been beneficial in environments where hunger was a constant threat. But in modern societies where food is plentiful, the same traits can increase the likelihood of metabolic disorders. Over many generations, certain metabolic variations may become less common if they consistently reduce long-term health or fertility in environments of abundance. Meanwhile, variants that support healthier responses to modern diets may gradually become more represented. This is not a rapid transformation, but evolutionary processes rarely are. The quiet adjustments happening in metabolic genes reflect the ongoing dialogue between biology and environment. Reproductive biology provides another indication that genes continue to shift. Traits influencing fertility, hormonal patterns, and reproductive timing vary across populations and individuals. Some people naturally reach puberty earlier or later. Some experience higher or lower fertility due to subtle genetic differences. These variations influence reproductive outcomes. Even small differences in who has children earlier, who has more children, and who delays parenthood can shape genetic patterns over generations. Modern reproductive technologies complicate this landscape by allowing individuals with certain fertility challenges to have children, but that doesn't halt evolution. It changes which traits remain within the gene pool, allowing variation to persist that might have been lost under earlier conditions. Genes affecting physical traits also continue shifting, though the changes may be modest. Height, for example, is influenced by hundreds of genetic variants interacting with nutrition, childhood health, and lifestyle. Nutritional improvements increased average height in many regions over the past century, revealing biological potential that was limited by previous environmental conditions. But gene frequencies linked to height still vary across populations, reflecting historical pressures. As environments evolve, traits like height may continue to shift, shaped not only by biology, but by cultural patterns related to mate choice, diet, and lifestyle. Vision offers another example. Nearsightedness has increased dramatically worldwide over the past century, especially in regions where people spend significant time indoors or focusing on close tasks. This rapid rise is largely driven by environmental factors, but genetic predisposition plays a role. Over time, if certain environments favour traits that improve visual adaptability or reduce susceptibility to vision problems, genetic patterns may reflect that. The interplay between environment and genes ensures that even traits influenced heavily by lifestyle can participate in long-term evolutionary change. Genes affecting mental traits also continue to shift. Humans vary in attention, emotional regulation, social behaviour, risk-taking, and stress responses. These variations influence how individuals navigate modern environments filled with digital communication, dense social interactions, and constant stimuli. Some traits that were advantageous in ancient environments may be less suited to modern ones, while others become more relevant. Although cultural evolution greatly shapes mental traits through learning and behaviour, genetic influences still play a role, and differences in how people thrive or struggle in modern environments may, over many generations, guide evolutionary outcomes. Patterns in disease susceptibility also reflect ongoing genetic shifts. Some conditions linked to specific genetic variants, such as sickle cell disease, provide protection against malaria in certain regions. The distribution of these variants continues to change as environments and disease patterns shift. Traits that once offered survival advantages may become less common if the environment supporting those advantages disappear. Conversely, traits that offer even slight protection in modern context may become more prevalent over generations. Evolution doesn't require dramatic differences in survival. It only requires consistent differences in reproductive outcomes, even when those differences unfold slowly. Another important dimension involves genetic drift, the random changes in gene frequencies that occur simply due to chance. In large, interconnected populations, drift plays a subtle but ongoing role. Populations blend, migrate, and shift, allowing certain variants to become more or less common without being tied to survival advantages. drift doesn't reflect adaptation, but it contributes to the overall shape of genetic variation. Even random shifts demonstrate that our gene pool is dynamic rather than static. Selective pressures today also differ across regions, creating multiple evolutionary paths at once. Some populations experience environmental challenges related to heat, pollution, or food scarcity, while others experience challenges tied to cold climates, urban density, or chemical exposure. Each environment shapes gene frequencies differently. This leads to a mosaic of ongoing genetic change rather than a single global trend. What looks like stability on a global scale is actually a complex network of local adaptations unfolding quietly within specific communities. It's also important to remember that genes respond to the environments we create through cultural and technological evolution. As technology introduces new expectations for attention, communication, and cognition, the traits that support success in those environments may gradually influence genetic patterns. Likewise, cultural norms surrounding family size, partner choice, and reproductive timing interact with biology to shape evolutionary outcomes indirectly. Even though cultural evolution moves much faster than biological change, biology still responds over the long term, adjusting slowly to whatever world culture creates. When people say humans stopped evolving, they often mean that the changes we see today are subtle and not immediately visible. But evolution does not need to announce itself through dramatic transformations. It works through countless small adjustments, shifts in gene frequencies, subtle differences in health, slight variations in reproductive patterns that accumulate over time. Our genes never stopped shifting. They simply shifted into a rhythm that aligns with the complexity of modern life rather than the stark challenges of the ancient world. The important idea is that the invisible processes shaping us have never paused. They continue beneath our skin, in every cell, responding quietly to a world that keeps changing faster than any single generation can fully comprehend. The idea that humans reach some kind of final form is one of the most persistent misunderstandings about evolution. It appears in casual conversations, in old philosophical arguments, and even in the way people talk about modern life, as though we crossed a finish line somewhere in the recent past and now exist outside the forces that shaped every living thing before us. This belief carries a quiet implication, the notion that humanity has been refined, polished, optimized, or completed. But evolution does not deal in perfection. It does not recognize goals, destinations, or final versions. It works only with the conditions of the present moment, and as long as conditions change, populations change with them. The myth of a perfected humanity persists partly because the world around us feels safe and controlled, partly because we see our species through the lens of technology and intelligence, and partly because we misunderstand what it means for a species to be shaped by evolution in the first place. To understand how humans continue to evolve, we have to let go of the idea that evolution ever intended to perfect us, or that perfection is even possible. One reason this myth feels convincing is that modern humans appear remarkably successful. We survive in environments our bodies were never built for. We build systems that protect us from hunger, thirst, cold, and disease. We shape landscapes, design tools, form complex societies, and explore places that would be lethal without technology. Compared to most species, we seem exempt from many natural constraints. But technological success does not imply biological completion. Technology reduces the influence of certain selective pressures, but it also introduces new ones. The appearance of stability at the surface hides the ongoing movement happening underneath. A species can thrive in the present while still changing slowly over generations. Success is not the same thing as perfection. It simply means that a species happens to fit the current conditions well enough to persist. Should those conditions change, as they always do, the traits that feel advantageous today may not be advantageous tomorrow. Another reason the myth persists is that humans tend to judge evolution through a biased lens. We look at our cognitive abilities, our creative expression, our problem-solving skills, and our ability to alter our environment, and we assume these traits represent a pinnacle rather than a set of adaptations suited to specific circumstances. Intelligence itself is not a sign of evolutionary completion. It is one strategy among many. Evolution has produced creatures with extreme strength, extreme speed, extreme sensory abilities, extreme regeneration, and extreme metabolic efficiency. Humans excel cognitively, but cognition is not the endpoint of evolution, any more than the wings of a hawk are the endpoint of avian evolution. Different environments favour different traits. If the world were to shift dramatically, intelligence might remain useful, or it might matter far less than resilience to heat, resistance to pathogens, or the ability to metabolize scarce nutrients. The myth of perfection also arises from the assumption that evolution constantly improves a species over time. In reality, evolution does not improve anything. It adapts populations to their environments, and environments themselves are constantly in flux. A trait that seems beneficial in one era can become problematic in another. For instance, humans evolved to crave high-calorie foods because calories were once scarce. That same trait now contributes to health challenges in environments of abundance. Something that helped our ancestors survive can become a disadvantage under different cultural or technological conditions. If evolution aimed at perfection, traits would become universally advantageous. But traits do not behave that way. They reflect trade-offs. A variation that increases strength might reduce flexibility. A variation that supports rapid growth might increase energy demands. A variation that enhances immunity might increase inflammatory risks. Species are mosaics of compromises, not refined ideals. Another reason the myth feels comforting is that it removes the uncertainty of future change. If humans are complete, then the future becomes predictable. We imagine that our biology will remain stable indefinitely, even as everything else around us transforms. This illusion creates a false sense of confidence. But no species remains unchanged simply because it desires stability. The future will bring new diseases, new climates, new social structures, new technologies, and new challenges that we cannot fully anticipate. These conditions will influence survival, health, fertility, and longevity in ways that guide evolutionary change. Even if the changes are subtle, they will accumulate. Evolution never stops simply because a species becomes technologically sophisticated. A major misunderstanding behind the myth is the belief that evolution pushes species toward complexity. People often mistake complexity for improvement. Humans look more complex than many species, so it is tempting to assume we represent the most advanced point evolution can reach. But evolution does not seek complexity. Some of the most successful organisms on Earth, bacteria, insects, grasses, are relatively simple. Their success comes from adaptability, efficiency, and resilience, not from complexity. Complexity appears when it happens to solve a problem within a specific environment. If environments change, complexity might become irrelevant or even disadvantageous. The human body contains countless inefficiencies, vulnerabilities, and structural limitations that reflect its long, winding evolutionary history. If evolution aimed to create a perfected being, our bodies would not include so many constraints inherited from earlier forms. The idea of perfection also ignores the fact that evolution cannot look ahead. It cannot predict future environments. It cannot plan for future threats. It cannot anticipate climate shifts, technological advances, or cultural changes. Instead, it responds to whatever pressures exist in the present. This means there is no stable target for evolution to aim toward. As long as the environment changes, the population adapts. The myth of perfection implies a fixed endpoint, but evolution operates through continuous adjustment. Even if humans were perfectly adapted to one set of conditions, those conditions would eventually shift. Evolution responds to that shift, ensuring the process continues indefinitely. Sometimes the myth of perfection arises when people observe that modern humans no longer experience the same intense survival pressures as early humans. Because fewer people die from starvation, infection, or predation, it may seem that natural selection has weakened to the point where evolution has stopped. But weaker selection is not the same as no selection. It simply means that different pressures dominate. Health differences, fertility patterns, partner preferences, stress resilience, environmental exposure, and behavioral tendencies now play larger roles in shaping reproductive outcomes. Evolution does not require dramatic mortality to operate. It requires only that some individuals leave more descendants than others. These differences accumulate slowly, but they still guide genetic shifts over time. Another reason the myth persists involves the way people interpret genetic diversity. When we look at humans today, especially in a global context, we see a wide range of appearances, behaviours, cultural expressions, and lifestyles. This variation creates the impression that humanity has reached some kind of equilibrium, a stable distribution of traits rather than directional change. But variety does not indicate perfection. It indicates ongoing adaptation within a diverse and interconnected population. As people move across regions, form new communities, and encounter new environments, genetic mixing produces diversity that masks the underlying patterns. Evolution may not produce a single direction of change, but that does not mean it produces no change at all. Instead, it reflects multiple directions unfolding simultaneously across different populations and environments. The myth of perfection also persists, because humans often treat themselves as separate from nature. We build structures that insulate us from weather, cultivate crops rather than forage for food, and design tools to solve problems rather than relying solely on physical abilities. These behaviours create the illusion that nature no longer shapes us. But even in controlled environments, our bodies and minds respond to natural pressures: nutrition, disease, temperature, stress, social structure, and reproduction. Technology alters these pressures but does not eliminate them. Nature still acts on us through indirect pathways, health patterns, generational timing, and behavioural influences. And the technologies we create become part of the environment evolution responds to. A species cannot escape evolution simply by reshaping its surroundings. It can only change the form of the pressures acting on it. The idea of a perfected humanity also ignores how unpredictable evolutionary paths can be. If a new pathogen emerges that interacts with specific genetic traits, those traits may become more or less common in future generations. If climate change alters global environments significantly, traits related to heat tolerance, hydration efficiency, or metabolic balance may become more influential. If modern lifestyles continue to shape reproductive patterns, traits that support resilience to chronic stress or adaptability to digital environments may gradually become more common. None of these possibilities reflect perfection. They reflect adaptation to conditions we cannot fully foresee. Even the idea of defining perfection becomes problematic. What constitutes a perfect human? Is it someone who never becomes ill? Someone who thrives in extreme environments? Someone who is emotionally resilient, highly intelligent, physically strong, or creatively gifted? Evolution cannot aim for such ideals because these traits do not universally increase reproductive success. A trait that benefits one context may hinder another. A trait beneficial at one point in history may become irrelevant or disadvantageous under different conditions. Perfection assumes a single, timeless standard, but evolution operates through continual trade-offs rather than a pursuit of ideal forms. Another aspect of the myth involves the belief that gene editing or reproductive technologies will allow humans to engineer perfection. While technology may influence future evolution, it cannot create a perfect human because perfection cannot be defined. More importantly, any engineered trait exists within a network of biological interactions. Changing one trait can affect many others. Intelligence, strength, height, immunity, metabolism, and emotional tendencies involve hundreds or thousands of interacting genes. There is no straightforward path toward improvement. Technology may allow new forms of adaptation, but it does not bypass the reality that biology is interconnected and context-dependent. Even engineered changes would reflect choices influenced by culture and personal values, rather than any objective biological ideal. Perhaps the deepest reason the myth persists is emotional. People want to believe humanity has reached a point of stability, that we are no longer vulnerable to the shifting forces that shaped the species before us. The idea that we are complete offers a sense of security, but evolution does not grant such security. It reflects the ongoing relationship between a species and its environment. As long as environments change, humans will continue to adapt, genetically, culturally, and behaviourally. This ongoing process is not a threat to stability. It is the source of resilience that allowed our species to survive countless challenges throughout history. Understanding that humans are not perfected but continuously evolving helps shift the way we view ourselves. Instead of assuming we reach the end of our biological story, we can recognise that we are part of a long unfolding process with no final form. Human evolution is often described as something that happens to us, a force acting from the outside, shaping our species through pressures we neither control nor fully understand. But in the modern world, many of the forces guiding evolution arise from the choices people make every day. Choices about how to live, where to live, what to eat, whom to partner with, when to have children, how many children to raise, and what kinds of environments we build for the next generation. These choices do not override evolution. They become evolution's raw material. They create the patterns that determine which traits become more common, which become less common, and which remain dormant until circumstances change again. When we say that humans continue to evolve, we are really saying that each generation's collective decisions shape the conditions the next generation inherits. And those conditions quietly influence biological outcomes in ways most people never think about as they move through the routines of daily life. Our choices shape future humans first through the environments we create. Every landscape, every city, every home, every work setting, and every cultural system alters the daily rhythms of life. These environments influence health, behaviour, stress, and fertility, all of which guide evolutionary patterns over time. Consider urban living. Cities are dense, noisy, saturated with artificial light, and structured around schedules rather than natural cycles. People who handle stimulation will often thrive in fast-paced environments. People who adapt quickly to new systems and social structures may find greater stability. These patterns can influence whom they meet, how they form relationships, and when they choose to start families. None of this resembles the dramatic survival pressures of early human history, but evolutionary pressures do not require drama. They require only that patterns persist across generations. If certain traits help individuals navigate the environments humans willingly build, those traits may gradually become more common, even if the differences remain subtle in any single generation. Choices also shape evolution through diet. Humans have unprecedented control over what they eat, how often they eat, and the kinds of foods they rely on. Dietary patterns influence metabolism, long-term health, and reproductive outcomes. Some individuals respond well to modern diets rich in processed foods, while others face heightened risks of metabolic disorders. Over many generations, traits that support resilience in these environments could become more common simply because individuals with those traits experience fewer long-term health challenges that influence fertility or longevity. Meanwhile, individuals whose biology is better suited to older dietary patterns may face more difficulties. These outcomes do not appear suddenly. They accumulate slowly as countless small differences shape reproductive decisions and health trajectories over time. Reproductive choices form another powerful influence on future evolution. In early human history, reproduction depended heavily on survival. Individuals who lived long enough to have children passed on traits that helped them survive. Today, many people reach reproductive age regardless of genetic differences in health or resilience. But who actually has children, how many they have, and at what age they choose to have them varies dramatically across populations. These differences are shaped by personal goals, cultural expectations, economic conditions, and lifestyle preferences. Yet behind these factors lie biological influences tied to temperament, hormonal patterns, health, and fertility. Some people naturally prefer larger families. Others prefer not to have children at all. Some individuals form long-term bonds easily, while others gravitate toward different relationship structures. Some reach puberty earlier, which can influence lifetime fertility. Some experience health conditions that reshape reproductive decisions. Some delay family formation because of education or career, while others prioritize early parenthood. When such patterns persist across generations, they influence which genetic traits become more common or less common. Evolution follows fertility, not ideology. Even when people believe their reproductive choices are personal or cultural, biology interacts silently with those choices to shape future populations. Partner choice also plays a major role. In the past, partner choice was constrained by geography, community size, and social structure. Today, individuals choose partners based on compatibility, shared values, personality, physical attraction, communication style, and emotional connection. All these factors interact with biological traits in complex ways. Certain personality traits may make it easier to form stable relationships. Certain emotional tendencies may influence the likelihood of raising multiple children. Preferences surrounding kindness, humour, ambition, or confidence can subtly shape which traits move forward. These patterns are not intentional evolutionary strategies, but evolution doesn't require intention. It requires repeated outcomes. And as long as partner choice influences family formation, it will continue to shape gene frequencies. Education and career decisions also influence evolutionary patterns. When individuals pursue long educational paths or careers requiring extended training, they often delay childbearing. This shifts reproductive timing and may reduce the total number of children they have. Meanwhile, individuals who prioritize family earlier contribute more to the next generation. Neither choice is better or worse in a moral sense. They simply create different evolutionary trajectories. Reproductive timing has always influenced evolution, but modern life makes the differences far more variable. People have children at widely different ages depending on their aspirations, opportunities, and lifestyles. These differences shape generational length, fertility patterns, and long-term population trends. Over many generations, such differences accumulate, altering the distribution of traits related to puberty timing, fertility, and life planning tendencies. Another way our choices shape evolution is through health behaviours. Exercise, sleep patterns, exposure to sunlight, stress management, and even daily routines influence long-term health. Traits that make it easier to maintain healthy habits may indirectly influence reproductive outcomes. Some individuals naturally regulate stress well, others struggle with it. Some have strong circadian resilience, adjusting easily to irregular schedules. Others are strongly affected by disrupted sleep. These differences can influence mental health, physical well-being, longevity, and fertility. When people form families and raise children under specific health patterns, those patterns, interacting with underlying biological predispositions, shape generational outcomes. Individuals who adapt better to modern demands may navigate life more smoothly, influencing how they form relationships and raise families. Climate-related choices also guide evolution. As environments warm, weather shifts, and new ecological conditions emerge, traits related to heat tolerance, hydration efficiency, and resilience to environmental stresses may become more influential. People choose where to live based on lifestyle preferences, careers, family connections, and cultural appeal. but those choices create clusters of populations exposed to specific environmental pressures. Over many generations, these differences can produce local adaptations, just as altitude and climate created adaptations in earlier populations. The world humans inherit depends partly on the choices their ancestors make today. Choices about emissions, conservation, land use, and resource distribution. Evolution responds to whatever world it encounters. Our choices about technology shape evolution as well. As people rely more heavily on digital tools, traits that support adaptability in information-rich environments may carry subtle advantages. Attention patterns, multitasking ability, emotional regulation, and tolerance for digital stimulation vary across individuals. Some people thrive in environments saturated with information, others find them overwhelming. These differences influence stress, productivity, social connections, and lifestyle, all of which tie into long-term health and reproductive decisions. Technology shapes partner choice, social networks, work trajectories, and even cognitive expectations. Over many generations, the traits that best align with this environment may grow more common simply because individuals possessing them navigate life with fewer barriers. Even migration choices contribute to human evolution. People move to new regions for opportunity, safety, climate, education, or personal preference. Migration blends previously separate genetic lineages, increases diversity, and reshapes populations. It creates new combinations of traits that evolution can act upon. It also exposes individuals to new environments, diets, social structures, and technologies. These shifts influence health outcomes and reproductive patterns. Migration is one of the most significant drivers of modern genetic change, not because it selects specific traits directly, but because it mixes traits in ways that generate new variation. Variation is the foundation of evolution. Without it, evolution stalls. Human mobility ensures that variation remains high, providing fertile ground for future changes. Our choices surrounding healthcare influence evolution too. Access to medicine affects survival, longevity, fertility, and family planning. Vaccination shapes immune landscapes. Treatments for chronic diseases influence who lives to reproductive age and how they navigate later life. Even reproductive technologies shape which traits persist into future generations. None of these choices erase evolution. They simply shape the conditions evolution responds to. By choosing to intervene in health outcomes, humans direct which traits remain in the population, sometimes preserving traits that once would have disappeared. This increases diversity and alters the long-term trajectory of populations. Cultural choices also shape evolution indirectly. Ideas about family size, gender roles, parenting, education, and career all influence reproductive patterns. Cultures that value large families produce different evolutionary outcomes than cultures that prioritize small families or delayed childbearing. Cultural norms about marriage, partnership, and community influence who forms long-term relationships and how those relationships translate into future generations. These norms shift rapidly compared to biological evolution, but biology responds over long spans of time to whatever cultural environment persists. Even personal preferences, things that seem purely individual, can become evolutionary influences when they scale across populations. Preferences for certain traits in partners, preferences for particular lifestyles, preferences for living in specific environments, preferences for certain schedules or work structures, preferences for stability or novelty. These small patterns accumulate across millions of people and shape the future distribution of traits in quiet, consistent ways. One of the most surprising forms of influence comes from the choices we make about stress. Modern life exposes people to chronic stress in ways very different from the acute dangers faced by early humans. People vary in how they respond to long-term stress. Some remain resilient, while others experience significant challenges. These differences can influence fertility, health, relationship stability, and life outcomes. As stress patterns shift with culture, urbanization, and technology, traits that support resilience in these environments may quietly influence evolutionary outcomes. The crucial insight is that evolution does not require intentional choices for those choices to matter. People do not need to think about evolution for their decisions to shape it. Every action that affects reproduction, directly or indirectly, guides the direction of future human traits. Our biology interacts with our behaviors in ways that create patterns. Evolution follows these patterns wherever they lead. What this means is that humans are not passive recipients of evolutionary forces. We participate in creating them. The lives we build, the environments we inhabit, the partners we choose, the families we form, and the values we pass down all shape the genetic and cultural landscape that future generations will navigate. Evolution is not something that happened only in the distant past. It is something happening now through the choices people make, quietly, gradually, and inevitably. Human evolution has always been guided by the conditions that shape survival, health, and reproduction. In the past, those forces were easy to identify. Climate shifts, scarcity, predators, disease, and geographic isolation created pressures that left clear signatures in our biology. Today, the forces shaping the future of our species are far more intricate. They arise not only from nature but from the environments we build, the technologies we depend on, the lifestyles we choose, and the global patterns that ripple across populations. These forces act slowly, quietly, and often indirectly, but they still shape the trajectory of human evolution just as surely as ancient pressures once did. Understanding these future forces requires stepping out of the old view of evolution as something tied solely to survival in harsh conditions, and instead seeing it as a continuous interplay between biology and the shifting world we create. One of the most powerful forces guiding future evolution is the ongoing transformation of our physical environment. Climate change will alter conditions across the globe in ways that affect health, movement, and long-term adaptation. Rising temperatures may favour traits related to heat tolerance, hydration efficiency, and cardiovascular resilience. Individuals who function well in hotter climates may experience fewer health challenges, while those more sensitive to heat may face greater strain. These differences won't create sudden evolutionary leaps, but over many generations, even small influences can shift the distribution of traits within populations. Regions facing prolonged heat, drought, or changing ecosystems may produce different evolutionary patterns than regions experiencing milder shifts. Human biology will respond slowly to these new conditions, but it will respond nonetheless, adjusting to whatever environments persist across centuries. Another force shaping future evolution involves the changing landscape of disease. While modern medicine protects us from many infections, new pathogens continue to emerge, and global travel can spread illnesses faster than ever. Some individuals naturally possess immune traits that offer slight advantages against certain diseases. Others respond differently to vaccines or treatments due to genetic variation. As new pathogens interact with human populations, even subtle differences in immune function may influence long-term outcomes. Chronic conditions such as autoimmune disorders, inflammatory diseases, and allergies are also shaped partly by genetics. As environmental factors change, the prevalence of these conditions may shift, influencing which immune traits become more common. Evolution does not eliminate disease entirely. It navigates the ongoing relationship between human biology and the microbial world, adjusting gradually to new challenges. Urbanization is another future force that will continue shaping human evolution. More people than ever live in cities, dense, fast-moving environments filled with artificial light, noise, digital communication, and highly structured social interactions. These environments place different demands on the body and the mind. Individuals who adapt easily to sensory-rich settings may experience smoother social and professional lives. Those with stronger resilience to constant stimulation may cope better with the stress of crowded spaces and rapid information flow. Over many generations, these subtle differences in resilience, stress tolerance, and attention patterns may influence reproductive outcomes. Traits that support thriving in urban environments may gradually increase in frequency, while traits less suited to these conditions may decrease. Because urbanization is spreading worldwide, these pressures may become more influential than the environmental forces that shaped our ancestors. Reproductive patterns represent another major evolutionary force moving forward. In the past, survival to reproductive age was the central barrier in evolution. Today, survival is much more uniform, but reproduction varies significantly between individuals and populations. Decisions about when to have children, how many to have, and whether to have children at all strongly influence genetic outcomes. People who naturally prefer larger families may contribute more to future generations. People who delay childbearing or choose not to have children contribute less. These choices interact with biological factors such as fertility, hormonal patterns, reproductive timing, and temperament. Over generations, traits that influence these preferences may become more common or less common. This process is slow, but it is continuous. Evolution follows reproductive patterns wherever they lead, and modern patterns introduce new directions that differ from those of the past. Partner selection will also remain a force shaping future evolution. In the modern world, individuals often choose partners based on personality traits, compatibility, emotional connection, shared values, and communication style. These factors interact with biology in ways we often overlook. Traits related to empathy, patience, emotional regulation, confidence, and social cooperation can influence relationship stability. Stable relationships often correlate with higher rates of reproduction or smoother child-rearing experiences. As partner choice continues to reflect emotional and psychological compatibility, traits that support long-term relational well-being may become more influential in shaping future populations. The rise of digital platforms and global communication expands partner selection beyond geographic boundaries, blending traits in ways that create new combinations. Diversity increases and evolution gains new material to act upon. Technology itself will remain one of the strongest forces guiding human evolution. As digital environments reshape attention, memory, communication, and learning, the traits that allow individuals to navigate these environments effectively may influence long-term success and stability. People vary in their response to constant information flow, multitasking demands, and rapid social feedback. Some individuals thrive under these conditions, adjusting quickly to new tools and communication styles. Others find the digital landscape overwhelming. These differences influence stress, mental health, productivity, and social patterns. Over many generations, the traits that support adaptability in technology-rich environments may become more common simply because they align with the demands of modern life. Meanwhile, future technologies, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, neural interfaces, wearable sensors, will introduce new cognitive and emotional requirements that could shape human traits in ways we cannot yet predict. Another future force involves global migration. People move across continents for education, opportunity, safety, or personal preference. Migration blends genetic lineages that previously evolved under different environmental and cultural pressures. This mixing reduces geographic isolation and increases genetic diversity, which gives evolution more pathways to explore. High diversity does not stop evolution, it creates resilience. It also allows local adaptations to arise in response to new environments, as individuals with varied traits encounter different conditions. As migration continues, the global human population will become more genetically interconnected. This may smooth out some differences while amplifying others, depending on how populations expand, merge, and settle in new regions. Medical advancements also shape future evolutionary patterns. Treatments that support fertility, manage chronic illnesses, or improve survival allow a broader range of genetic traits to persist. Instead of removing traits that once prevented reproduction, medicine preserves them. This increases genetic diversity, which may influence how populations adapt in the future. At the same time, medical technologies such as gene editing introduce new ethical and biological questions. While editing specific traits remains complex, the potential for future interventions means that human evolution may eventually include deliberate choices about which traits persist. These choices would not replace natural evolution, but would become part of the evolutionary landscape, interacting with existing patterns rather than overriding them. Environmental toxins and pollutants form another future force. Exposure to chemicals, microplastics, air pollution, and artificial materials varies across individuals and populations. Some people tolerate these exposures better due to differences in metabolism, detoxification, or immune response. Over many generations, traits that confer resilience to environmental stresses may become more common. As new materials enter the environment, they introduce pressures that evolution must respond to slowly through changes in population traits. Social structures create their own evolutionary pressures. Norms surrounding education, gender roles, parenting, and family life shape reproductive outcomes in complex ways. Cultures that emphasize early family formation create different patterns than cultures that emphasize career development before parenthood. These cultural differences interact with biology over time. For example, traits that support success in high-demand professional environments may correlate with delayed reproduction, while traits that support early family formation may correlate with larger families. Evolution follows the outcomes created by these cultural patterns, creating differences that unfold slowly across populations. Another force shaping future evolution is the growing importance of mental resilience. Modern life exposes people to chronic stress, information overload, and constant social evaluation. Individuals differ in how they respond to these pressures. Some maintain emotional balance easily. Others experience heightened anxiety, depression, or burnout. Cognitive flexibility, stress tolerance, emotional regulation, and adaptability may become increasingly important traits as environments continue to change rapidly. Over many generations, if these traits correlate with reproductive stability or long-term well-being, they may gradually influence evolutionary patterns. Energy availability and resource distribution will also guide future evolution. As humans face environmental challenges related to water scarcity, food production, and habitat changes, traits related to metabolic efficiency, disease resilience, or adaptability to shifting climates may grow more significant. For example, populations in regions facing food instability may develop different metabolic pressures than populations with stable food systems. Even if technology mitigates these challenges, biological responses may still emerge over long periods. Another subtle but powerful force involves the cultural transmission of values. Values shape reproductive decisions, lifestyle patterns, and family structures. People choose how many children to have based on personal beliefs, financial stability, cultural norms, and societal expectations. These values influence the traits that future generations inherit, not because values themselves are genetic, but because the traits associated with particular lifestyles may correlate with different reproductive outcomes. The interplay between cultural values and biological traits will continue to shape human evolution in ways that reflect the complexity of modern life. The expansion of digital communities introduces new social forces. The ability to form strong relationships online, collaborate globally, and participate in shared cultural spaces changes who people connect with and how they build their identities. Traits that support communication across digital distances may grow more influential. Meanwhile, digital misinformation, shifting social norms, and new forms of connection may alter the patterns that guide long-term stability and family formation. These influences may seem abstract, but they shape real-life decisions that affect future generations. As we look toward the future, one of the most important insights is that evolution does not require dramatic pressures to continue. It responds to whatever conditions persist over many generations. The forces shaping future humans will include climate, disease, technology, culture, lifestyle, mobility, and the environments we choose to build. These forces are gentler and more intertwined than those of the past, but evolution does not demand harshness. It only demands variation and differences in long-term outcomes. Humans will not evolve into a predictable form. Instead, we will continue adapting to a world shaped by our own actions, a world that shifts quickly, challenges us in new ways, and creates conditions our biology must navigate slowly. The future of human evolution will be subtle, continuous, and guided by the cumulative weight of countless decisions made every day. It becomes clear that evolution does not fade simply because the world changes. It moves with us, adjusting quietly to the environments we build, shaping tomorrow's humans with a pace and patience that span generations. Many people imagine a future where humans take evolution into their own hands, shaping their biology with intent rather than leaving it to the slow interplay of chance, environment, and reproduction. It is a powerful idea, partly because it suggests control, and partly because it feels like a natural extension of the tools we already use to shape our lives. We already alter crops, domesticate animals, design medications, and build technologies that extend our abilities beyond anything our ancestors imagined. It seems reasonable to ask whether we might one day guide our own genetic future. But the question is more complicated than it appears. Directing evolution is not simply a matter of editing genes or choosing traits. It involves understanding the subtle, interconnected patterns that shape biology across generations. It involves recognizing the limits of our knowledge and the unintended consequences that arise when complex systems are altered. It also requires confronting the difference between what is technically possible and what is socially, ethically, or biologically sustainable. The potential to guide our evolution may arise someday, but the path toward that possibility challenges our assumptions about control, progress, and what it means to shape life intentionally. One of the first challenges in imagining self-directed evolution is understanding the complexity of human traits. People often think of traits as simple switches: intelligence, height, strength, immunity, each controlled by discrete genes that can be turned on or off. But most traits are the result of interactions between hundreds or thousands of genes, combined with environmental influences that shape how those genes behave. Changing one gene can affect dozens of pathways. Adjusting a biological parameter in one direction can create unexpected changes elsewhere. Biology is full of trade-offs. A gene that offers protection against one disease may increase vulnerability to another. A variation that enhances physical performance may increase energy demands. A change that supports strong immunity may contribute to inflammation. Directing evolution would require navigating these trade-offs with extraordinary precision, something far beyond our current understanding. Gene editing technologies such as CRISPR introduced the idea that humans could alter their DNA deliberately. These tools allow scientists to correct harmful mutations, study genetic pathways, and explore potential treatments for inherited disorders. They demonstrate that human biology is not untouchable, but the leap from editing genes in individuals to guiding evolution in entire populations is immense. Editing a child's genes would influence only their lineage, and only if those edits affect reproductive traits or long-term health in ways that carry into future generations. Directing evolution at the population level would require coordinated, widespread application of genetic changes across millions of people. This introduces practical, ethical, and environmental questions without clear answers. Even if gene editing became widely accessible, individuals would choose different traits based on cultural preferences, personal beliefs, and practical concerns. This means self-directed evolution, if it occurred at all, would not follow a single unified path. It would produce a patchwork of variations shaped by different societies, technologies, and values. Some communities might prioritize cognitive traits, others might emphasize health, physical resilience, or sensory abilities. Still others might avoid genetic intervention entirely. Instead of a single directed future, humanity might branch into diverse genetic landscapes shaped by cultural choices. This would not resemble traditional evolution directed by environmental pressures, but rather a new kind of complexity driven by human intention, with outcomes that could diverge widely. Another challenge lies in predicting the consequences of genetic choices. Humans rarely agree on what counts as an ideal trait, and even when they do, ideal traits shift with time. Height seems advantageous in one era, but may become less desirable if resources or environments change. Cognitive traits valued in today's world may not align with tomorrow's challenges. Immune profiles that protect against current diseases may create vulnerabilities as pathogens evolve. Directing evolution assumes an ability to forecast the long-term effects of biological modifications, but the environment of the future is unpredictable. As climates shift, new technologies emerge and social structures transform. Traits that seem beneficial now may become mismatched later. Evolution traditionally avoids this problem because it adapts continuously to the present moment. Self-directed evolution risks locking populations into traits chosen under assumptions that may no longer hold. There is also the question of diversity. Evolution thrives on variation. Diversity within a population allows it to adapt to changing environments, resist diseases, and recover from disruptions. If humans attempted to direct evolution by narrowing the range of traits, focusing on a particular version of intelligence, appearance, or health, they might reduce the resilience of future generations. The loss of genetic diversity could make populations more vulnerable to new diseases or environmental changes. Directing evolution could unintentionally reduce humanity's ability to adapt, replacing natural resilience with fragile uniformity. Even small reductions in variation could influence long-term outcomes, creating vulnerabilities that would not be apparent for many generations. Another factor involves social and ethical constraints. Directing evolution requires decisions about which traits to prioritize and which to avoid. These decisions carry moral weight. They raise questions about fairness, equality, access, and the right to shape future generations. Who decides which traits are desirable? Who gains access to technologies that influence reproduction? How are unintended consequences managed once they affect entire populations? These challenges do not concern biology alone. They concern power, autonomy, and the meaning of human identity. Directing evolution would require not only advanced science, but also unprecedented global cooperation and ethical clarity. Achieving such alignment is far more difficult than editing genes themselves. It is also important to consider that humans already guide evolution indirectly through choices about reproduction, environment, culture, and technology. These influences shape which traits become more common, even without deliberate genetic modification. People choose partners, build environments, develop technologies, and adopt lifestyles that create new selective pressures. These pressures guide evolution in quiet but persistent ways. Directing evolution intentionally would simply add another layer to these existing influences. But unlike subtle patterns that unfold naturally, intentional interventions could produce abrupt changes with consequences we're not prepared to manage. Some imagine a future where artificial intelligence helps map genetic pathways so precisely that humans can predict outcomes with confidence. Advanced modelling might allow us to foresee how certain combinations of traits interact across environments. In such a scenario, directing evolution might become more feasible. But even with powerful tools, biology remains unpredictable. Evolution is not a machine with fixed output. It reflects interactions across countless variables, genes, environments, behaviours, technologies, cultures, and chance. Even an advanced model would struggle to account for all the contingencies that shape long-term outcomes. Directing evolution would require controlling not only biology, but the shifting world in which biology unfolds. A different possibility involves using technology not to alter genes directly, but to augment human abilities. Instead of rewriting biology, people may choose to supplement it with external tools, wearable devices, implants, gene therapies, or cognitive enhancements. These enhancements could reduce selective pressures on certain traits, or create environments where traditional biological adaptation becomes less relevant. In such a world, the boundary between technological enhancement and biological evolution becomes blurred. Humans might rely more on tools than on inherited traits, reducing the importance of biological change while increasing the importance of cultural and technological adaptation. This would not stop evolution, but it could redirect it toward traits associated with adaptability to augmented environments. Another important consideration is that evolution remains ongoing, even without deliberate intervention. Traits continue to shift based on modern pressures: urban life, environment, diet, stress, partner choice, and reproduction. Humans may decide someday to intervene, but until that moment, evolution continues its slow, steady work. Even if self-directed evolution becomes possible, it may not replace natural evolution entirely. Instead, the two processes may interact, blending intentional choices with environmental pressures in ways that create new forms of adaptation. It is also possible that future humans decide not to direct evolution at all. The risks may outweigh the benefits. The consequences may prove too unpredictable. Societies may choose instead to support diversity, resilience, and adaptability by allowing evolution to unfold naturally. Technologies may treat diseases without altering inherited traits, allowing biological variation to remain intact. The desire for control may give way to a recognition that evolution's slow pace offers stability, balance, and long-term adaptability that deliberate intervention cannot guarantee. Still, the possibility remains that humans could guide their evolution in small, careful ways. Gene therapies might reduce the prevalence of certain inherited disorders without altering broader traits. Reproductive technologies might support healthier outcomes without shaping population genetics directly. Over time, humans might learn to influence specific aspects of biology while leaving most of evolution untouched. This approach would merge biological insight with restraint, shaping the future gently rather than transforming it abruptly. The deeper question behind all of this is not whether humans could direct their evolution, but whether they should. Evolution has no inherent direction, no vision of improvement, no final form. It adapts populations to their environments through countless generations of subtle change. Human attempts to influence this process must grapple with the reality that evolution's strength lies in its responsiveness, its patience, and its capacity to generate diversity. To direct evolution is to take responsibility for consequences unfolding long after the decisions are made. It is to shape the future of humanity deliberately, with all the complexity that implies. The potential to influence our evolution may grow, but the responsibility grows with it. Whether humans someday guide their biological future intentionally, or whether we continue evolving through subtle pressures shaped by our choices and environments, evolution remains a constant presence. It follows the conditions we create and the decisions we make, shaping future generations in ways we may not always recognize. The question of directing evolution invites us to consider not only what is possible, but what kind of species we wish to become, and how the forces we choose to unleash today will echo across the distant future. The story of humanity has never been a straight line, and it has never been a finished one. Every generation inherits a world shaped by the people who came before, and every generation leaves behind something different for the ones who follow. When we look across the span of human history, it's tempting to see ourselves as a species that climb towards stability, toward comfort, towards certainty. But when we step back and examine the quieter patterns beneath our progress, a different picture emerges, one in which change is not an interruption, but the foundation of who we are. Our bodies, our minds, our cultures, our choices and our technologies move together in a slow rhythm that continues beneath the surface of daily life. And even when that rhythm feels too gradual to notice, it is always shaping the next chapter. A closing reflection on this journey isn't a final note. It's a moment to trace the threads that connect everything we've explored, and to recognise that the story of human evolution continues to unfold in ways more subtle, interconnected, and expansive than anything our ancestors could have imagined. Modern humans often look for answers about where we're headed by examining the past. We imagine ancient landscapes filled with risks and difficulties, times when survival depended on physical traits and quick reactions. But evolution didn't end when those dangers faded. It transformed alongside the environments we built. We created systems that softened some pressures and intensified others. We learned to cure diseases that once shaped entire populations. We introduced technologies that reshaped how we think, how we communicate, and how we move through the world. Our cultures began to shift at speeds far beyond anything biological systems can match. And through all of this, our genes continued adjusting, not in dramatic leaps, but in steady, persistent responses to the world we continuously remake. As we follow the arc of human evolution into the present day, one of the most important insights is that change rarely looks dramatic from the inside. We see ourselves reflected in photographs, in families, in shared traits passed down through generations, and everything feels stable. But stability is an illusion created by the short window of a human lifespan. Evolution operates across centuries, not decades. The world we inhabit today will not remain the same for the generations that follow. Climate patterns are shifting, but environments are expanding, diets are changing, technologies are accelerating, social structures are evolving, and each one of these changes shapes the environment where human evolution quietly continues. The story of us is not a story of reaching an endpoint. It's a story of moving alongside the world we create. When we look at the environment shaping future humans, we find influences that would have been unimaginable for earlier generations. The rhythm of daily life no longer depends on sunlight and seasons. Artificial light stretches our waking hours far into the night. Screens shape our focus, our interactions, and even our emotions. Cities concentrate millions of people into dense environments filled with noise, urgency, and constant movement. The digital world overlays reality with new expectations for attention, response time, and social navigation. These environments select for traits without our awareness. The individuals who cope well with information-rich landscapes may find stability and opportunity. Those who struggle may face obstacles that affect long-term patterns of health and relationships. Not because one set of traits is better, but because the environments we build reward different traits than the environments that shaped our ancestors. Meanwhile, the natural world continues to apply pressures of its own. Climate change introduces heat, drought, and unpredictable weather patterns that influence health and long-term resilience. New pathogens emerge as ecosystems shift, requiring immune responses that differ from those once necessary. Pollution affects bodies in ways that challenge metabolic, respiratory, and cardiovascular systems. These pressures unfold slowly, but they shape which traits offer advantages over many generations. Evolution's influence becomes visible only when viewed across long stretches of time, but those stretches begin with the choices people make today. Choices about how we live on the planet, and how we respond to the challenges that arise. Cultural evolution remains the fastest and most unpredictable force guiding our journey. Ideas can spread globally in hours. Norms change within a generation. Behaviours that once defined entire societies can disappear or transform almost overnight. And yet biology remains anchored to timelines that stretch far beyond the lifespan of a single individual. This creates a gap between who we are biologically and who we are culturally. That gap influences health, stress, family structures, educational pathways, and lifestyle patterns. Each of these influences shapes reproductive outcomes in ways that ripple into future generations. Cultural evolution doesn't replace biological evolution. It sets the pace and direction of the environment within which biology continues its slow, deliberate movement. One of the most important insights to carry forward from everything we've explored is the idea that evolution doesn't aim at improvement. It doesn't refine us toward perfection. It doesn't seek to complete us. It simply responds to whatever environment exists at the moment reproductive decisions are made. If an environment values cooperation, communication, and emotional resilience, those traits may slowly become more common. If it rewards adaptability, focus, and stress tolerance, those traits may shift as well. If environments become more challenging in ways we cannot yet predict, evolution will follow those pressures too. Perfection is not part of the equation. Adaptability is. Another essential point is that humans shape evolution as much as evolution shapes humans. The choices we make, where we live, how we structure families, how we use technology, what we value and what we prioritize, create the patterns that determine which traits persist. Evolution today emerges not only from environmental conditions but from human intention, desire, and imagination. Our cultural and technological choices become the ecosystems of the future. In that sense, the story of human evolution is also a story of human agency. We are participants, not spectators, in our biological future. The question of whether humans might someday direct their evolution more explicitly adds another layer to this reflection. While the possibility exists, and while technologies may advance to the point where genetic changes become more intentional, the complexity of biology ensures that such efforts will always involve uncertainty. The choices humans make about enhancing or altering traits will reflect cultural values rather than objective ideas of improvement. And even if such changes become common, they will still interact with natural evolutionary forces, disease, fertility patterns, environmental stresses, and the unpredictability of global change. Intentional evolution would not replace natural evolution. It would merge with it, creating outcomes that neither process could generate alone. When we look at the future, we see forces that will continue shaping us with or without our awareness. Climate, technology, environment, culture, disease, migration, and reproductive decisions all create pressures that guide the genetic and behavioral patterns of future generations. Some of these pressures will be gentle, others may be intense, some will encourage diversity, others may reduce it. But all of them will continue the story of human evolution, a story that began long before written history and will extend far beyond the times we live in now. A gentle closing thought brings us back to the quiet truth at the heart of everything we've explored. Humans never stopped evolving. We never paused. We never reached a final form. What changed was the landscape, not the process. Our evolution became harder to see because the pressures became more subtle and more intertwined with culture and technology. But the biological processes shaping us remain active, adjusting slowly to a world that transforms far faster than biology can follow. As we reflect on this continuing journey, it becomes clear that the story of humanity is not defined by stability, but by movement, not by perfection, but by adaptation, not by a fixed identity, but by the constant interplay between who we are and the world we create around ourselves. The forces guiding our evolution may shift with every generation, but the underlying process remains steady, patient, and deeply woven into the fabric of life. The story of us is still being written, not in sudden leaps, but in the quiet, persistent patterns shaped by millions of lives lived in countless environments. Each choice, each challenge, each discovery becomes part of that unfolding narrative. And as long as humans continue to live, imagine, build, and adapt, the story will keep changing. not toward a final destination, but toward whatever future emerges from the world we shape together. It is a story without an ending, a story defined by motion, a story carried forward by every generation,